Howdy folks. You're watching, No Harry, sit tight because today we bring you, what if Hogwarts itself rejected all professors and declared Harry headmaster at age 12? Smash that like, subscribe, and enjoy the ride. Chapter 1, The Plaque. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not the Hogwarts letter. Harry had gotten that one a year ago, had nearly fainted reading it on the floor of a tiny hut on a rock in the middle of the sea while Hagrid ate most of the birthday cake. No, this letter was different. It arrived via a school owl Harry didn't recognize, a great tawny bird that dropped a sealed envelope on his head while he was trying to pull weeds from Aunt Petunia's flower bed, then flew away without waiting for a reply or a treat. The Dursleys were inside. Harry could hear the television through the open kitchen window, some game show Vernon loved, the one with the wheel. He wiped his hands on his jeans and turned the envelope over. No address. No name. Just a wax seal he'd never seen before, not the Hogwarts crest with its 4 animals, but something older, a single tower with roots growing down from its base and branches growing up from its top, like a tree that had decided to become a building. Or a building that had decided to become a tree. He cracked the seal. Inside was a single card, thick cream paper, the kind that felt expensive just holding it. Written in ink that seemed to shift between deep green and black depending on the angle, the matter of the coming year has been settled. No further action is required on your part at this time. Present yourself at the gates on September the 1st. That was it. No signature. No explanation of what the matter was or who had settled it. Harry read it 3 more times, then folded it carefully and put it in his sock, because the Dursleys had a habit of going through his things, and something about this letter made him feel like it wasn't meant for anyone's eyes but his. He went back to pulling weeds. But he kept thinking about the roots growing down and the branches growing up, and the way the ink had moved like something living. The rest of the summer passed the way summers at the Dursleys always did, slowly, and with a persistent sense that the walls were slightly closer together than they'd been the day before. Vernon had installed a cat flap on Harry's bedroom door and padlocked Hedwig's cage after some incident involving a hover charm that Harry refused to feel guilty about, given that Dobby had done it, not him, and also given that Dobby was the single strangest creature he'd ever encountered. The small house elf had appeared in his bedroom in June, enormous green eyes wide, warning Harry not to return to Hogwarts. Terrible things are planned, Harry Potter. Dobby has heard whispers. Then the hover charm, then Vernon's face going the color of a ripe tomato, then the Malfoy dinner guests leaving in polite horror. Harry had thought about the warning. He'd decided to go back anyway. Whatever terrible things were planned for Hogwarts existed whether he was there or not, and he'd rather be there where he could actually do something about them. What he hadn't expected was for Hogwarts to handle the terrible things itself. He found out how, sitting in the Weasleys' kitchen 3 days before September 1st, eating the best breakfast he'd had all summer, Mrs. Weasley's scrambled eggs, thick toast, back bacon, while Ron passed him the Daily Prophet with a look on his face that Harry couldn't immediately categorize. Not shock. Not quite. More like the face someone made when they'd read something so strange that their brain was still deciding whether to believe it. The headline took up most of the front page: Hogwarts expels entire faculty, castle locks out professors, ministry in emergency session. Harry set down his fork. Keep reading, Ron said. The article, written by someone named Algernon Brisk whose name Harry had never seen in the Prophet before, read less like journalism and more like a witness statement written by someone in mild shock. In an event with no precedent in recorded wizarding history, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry appears to have expelled its entire teaching staff as of Monday evening. According to multiple sources, each professor, including Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, received a formal notice of removal delivered by the castle's enchantments themselves, in the form of personalized letters sealed with an unfamiliar crest. The Hogwarts gates have since refused entry to any former staff member, and attempts by ministry officials to enter the castle for assessment have similarly been rebuffed. Dumbledore himself, reached for comment at his brother's pub in Hogsmeade, stated only that he was watching the situation with great interest, and that he had every confidence the matter will resolve itself in due course. Professor Minerva McGonagall was unavailable for comment. Professor Severus Snape could not be reached, though sources describe him as not taking it well. The Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Education has convened an emergency session to discuss next steps, as Hogwarts remains locked and its interior status is currently unknown. The start of term is in 4 days. One further detail, reported by this correspondent and verified by 2 independent sources within the castle's alumni network, the headmaster's office door, previously bearing the nameplate of Albus Dumbledore, has been seen through a window by a groundskeeper's assistant. The new nameplate reads as follows: H. J. Potter. Headmaster Harry stared at the paper for a long time. Harry, Hermione said carefully. She'd arrived the previous evening, overnight bag and an expression suggesting she'd been waiting for permission to start talking about something urgent. Harry, I need you to understand that this is unprecedented. Nothing like this has ever, I know. The castle's enchantments date back to the founders. To have them activate in this way, at this scale, with this level of, Hermione. Intentionality, it implies a degree of sentience in the castle's core magic that most magical theorists have only speculated about, and the implications for, Hermione. She stopped. I got a letter, Harry said. In July. It said the matter of the coming year had been settled. He looked at the paper again. At his own name in print, formal and strange. I thought it was from Dumbledore. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, gnomes were making noise in the garden. One of the twins, Fred, Harry thought, was doing something on the roof that sounded structural. Ron picked up a piece of bacon and ate it. So, he said. You're the headmaster of Hogwarts. I'm 12. Yeah. I'll be 13 in, still 12 though. Harry looked at Mrs. Weasley, who had sat down heavily in her chair and was holding her tea with both hands, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. Not frightened. Not angry. Something between astonished and careful, the way you might look at a firework that hadn't gone off yet. What do I do? He asked her. It wasn't a rhetorical question. He genuinely wanted to know. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think, dear, that you go to Hogwarts on September the 1st. And you find out what the castle wants. The Hogwarts Express was louder than usual. Word had spread, the way word always spread in the wizarding world, fast and thorough and slightly wrong in the details. By the time Harry, Ron, and Hermione found a compartment and shut the door, they'd already passed 3 clusters of students talking about it. The version Harry heard most often on his way through the train was that he'd somehow forced Dumbledore out, that he'd done something at the end of last year, something at the end of the Quirrell situation, that had triggered a magic even Dumbledore couldn't override. I didn't do anything, Harry said to the window, watching platform 9 3/4 slide away behind the train. That's not entirely true, Hermione said. She'd already opened a book, not a textbook, something with theoretical foundations of sentient architecture stamped on the cover in small letters. You survived Voldemort for the 2nd time. Your mother's protection is a very old magic. Very deep magic. The kind the castle might have recognized. Recognized how? Like calls to like, she said, without looking up. Old magic recognizes old magic. Ron was eating from a packet of chocolate frogs, looking out the window on his side. What I want to know, he said, is what happens when we get there. You've never been the headmaster before. Neither has anyone our age. Are there rules for this? There are no rules for this, Hermione said, still not looking up. That's rather the problem. Brilliant, Ron said, and ate another frog. Harry said nothing. He was watching the countryside open up outside the window, the suburbs giving way to fields, the fields giving way to hills, and thinking about what Dobby had said in June. Terrible things are planned. About the way the castle's letter had arrived before the prophet, before anyone else knew, like it was telling him first. Like it had been waiting for him to know before anyone else did. He thought about the seal. The tower with the roots and the branches. He didn't feel powerful. He felt 12, which was the exact opposite of powerful, in his experience. But the feeling underneath that, quieter, steadier, was something different. Something that had been there since he'd walked into Gringotts the first time and seen his vault, since Hagrid had told him what he was, since he'd stood over Quirrell's crumbling body and felt the magic in his hands like something that had always been there and had just finally been given room. A sense of rightness he'd never had in any other area of his life. He'd always been good at knowing when something was true. And something about this, strange and impossible and logistically insane as it was, felt true. The carriages that should have been horse-drawn were self-propelling when they arrived at Hogsmeade Station, moving smoothly up the road toward the castle without anything pulling them. Harry filed this away as significant. The students around him were a mixture of nervous and excited in the way that disasters that hadn't quite happened yet always inspired, the giddy sense that they were present for something that would be a story later. First years looked purely terrified. The older students had the complicated expressions of people who had opinions they were waiting for permission to voice. Draco Malfoy's voice cut across the crowd near the castle gates. "I'm simply saying," he was telling a cluster of Slytherins who were visibly agreeing with whatever he'd been saying before Harry arrived in earshot, "that the Ministry will sort this out before the week is out. They won't leave Hogwarts in the hands of a 12-year-old. No offense," he added, spotting Harry, in a tone that communicated he had intended a great deal of offense. "None taken," Harry said, which seemed to genuinely annoy Malfoy more than anything else he could have said. The gates opened. Not grudgingly, they swung wide with a smooth, almost welcoming ease, the iron warm even in the September chill, and as Harry walked through them, he felt something he'd never quite felt before in his year at Hogwarts. A presence. Not threatening, almost the opposite. Like something very old had just looked up and noticed him. Like the building was glad he'd come. Malfoy walked through behind him, and Harry heard the slight hesitation in his step. So Malfoy had felt it too. Good. The entrance hall was lit by more torches than usual, and the suits of armor were at attention in a way they normally weren't, not the sleepy slouch of ordinary school furniture, but alert, upright, like a guard of honor. Several students stopped walking and looked around uncertainly. Peeves was absent, which was the strangest thing of all. "Welcome back," said the castle, which didn't say it with a voice, exactly, but said it with the warmth of the torchlight and the particular stillness of the air, and somehow Harry understood it anyway, the way you understood music, not as words but as feeling. He breathed in. "Right. Then. Hermione," he said quietly. "We need to figure out sleeping arrangements for the professors who aren't here, which means we need to figure out which rooms they were using. Ron, I need a list of every prefect in the school before dinner. Can you get that?" "How exactly?" asked the ghosts. "They know everyone's names." Ron blinked. "Right. Yeah. Okay. And somebody needs to check whether the kitchen is still running." "The house elves run the kitchen independently of the professors," Hermione said immediately. "I've read about it. They operate on Hogwarts protocols, not individual instruction." "Good. Then at least people can eat." He paused. "Where's the headmaster's office?" Hermione started, then stopped. The answer was usually up the gargoyle staircase, the one that responded to a password. But there was no Dumbledore to have set a password. "I'm not sure if you'd need the gargoyle at the base of the staircase stepped aside on its own." They all looked at it. "Right," said Harry again, and went up. The headmaster's office smelled like old books and something that was almost smoke but wasn't, something sweeter. The portraits on the walls were all of previous headmasters and headmistresses, and they were all awake, all watching him, which was unusual because normally portraits slept during the day. But they were watching, and they were quiet, and none of them were giving him the look he'd half expected, the scandalized look, the offended dignity of old power being passed over. A few of them looked curious. One old witch in the back was smiling. The desk was enormous. Dumbledore's things had been moved, or cleared, or perhaps removed by Dumbledore himself, and the surface was bare except for the ancient, battered sorting hat sitting on a stand in the center, and a leather-bound book open to a blank page with a quill resting in the crease. And the plaque. He'd read his name in the newspaper. He'd heard it said out loud by half the school. But seeing it here, on a small brass plaque screwed into the door he'd just walked through, was something else. Not frightening. Not thrilling exactly. Real. H.J. Potter Headmaster. He stood in front of it for a moment. Then he turned around and looked at the office, at the instrument-covered tables, the bookshelf running floor to ceiling on the west wall, the perch that Fawkes the Phoenix had occupied and now didn't, the view from the window of the grounds and the lake, the mountains purple and gray in the distance. Hermione had followed him up. She was standing just inside the doorway, book clutched to her chest, hair more chaotic than usual from the train journey, looking at him with an expression she was trying to make neutral and wasn't quite managing. "You're thinking," he said, "about how this is impossible." "I'm thinking," she corrected, "about how we make it work." Which was the difference, Harry thought, between a person who was frightened and a person who wasn't, and Hermione Granger, whatever she appeared on the surface, had never been the frightened kind. "Sit down," he said, pulling the headmaster's chair out and sitting in it himself, which felt deeply strange and exactly right at the same time. "We've got about 3 hours before the sorting feast. Talk to me." Hermione sat in the chair across the desk, Dumbledore's visitor's chair, which was larger and more comfortable than it had any right to be, and opened her book to a page she'd dog-eared on the train. "The castle's enchantments are layered," she said, going back to the founders. "The deepest layer, the foundational magic, has never been fully mapped because it predates our current understanding of enchantment theory. What we do know is that Hogwarts has always had a degree of autonomy, the moving staircases, the trick steps, the appearance and disappearance of rooms. The room of requirement," Harry said, remembering. "Exactly. But those have always been passive responses, the castle reacting to need. What's happened here is different. The castle made a decision. It acted proactively." "Why now?" Hermione was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of not knowing, the quiet of knowing and choosing her words. "I think," she said slowly, "that something the castle knows about the coming year is serious enough that it decided the current faculty was inadequate to handle it. The whole faculty. Including Dumbledore." Harry let that sit. Outside the window, the lake was very still. The giant squid surfaced briefly, one tentacle breaking the water, then slid back under. "Dobby warned me," he said. "He said terrible things were planned." "Which Dobby works for?" "The Malfoys." Hermione wrote something in the margin of her book, small, dense script. "That's important," she said, and didn't say more, and Harry agreed with her. "Okay," he said. "Then we start with what we have. Students, house elves, the castle itself. Portraits." He looked up at the wall. "Can you hear me?" Every portrait in the room turned to look at him simultaneously. "Right," he said, less startled than he'd expected to be. "I need help. I've never done this before. I need to know how this school actually runs, not the official version, the real version. The day-to-day. What breaks, what the students actually need, what the staff usually handle that the students never see." He paused. "Is there someone who can help me with that?" Silence for a moment. Then the old witch in the back row, round-faced, gray-haired, with an expression of someone who had been waiting a very long time for someone to ask a sensible question, leaned forward. "My name," she said, "is Dilys Derwent. I was headmistress from 1741 to 1768, and I have been waiting for about 40 years for someone to ask the portraits for help directly rather than just talking at us." She had a Scottish accent, crisp as autumn. "Sit forward, boy. We have a lot to get through before the feast." Harry sat forward. The great hall was full and loud and crackling with the particular energy of students who were excited about something beyond the ordinary, and what they were excited about was him. He could feel it walking in, the shift in the noise level, the heads turning, the whispered pointing that students did when they thought they were being subtle and weren't. He sat at the front, because there was no longer a high table with faculty, or rather, there was a high table, and it was currently occupied by the prefects he'd pulled together in the 45 minutes between the portrait's briefing and the feast, 9 older students from various houses who'd come to the office with expressions ranging from bewildered to professionally calm. He'd talked to them for half an hour, learned their names, told them the truth. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but the school needed to function, and he needed people who knew its rhythms. He'd been surprised by how quickly they'd moved from skeptical to engaged. He'd been more surprised by who'd surprised him most, a 7th-year Slytherin girl named Gemma Farley who'd walked in looking as though she expected to be dismissed and had ended up being the one to know, off the top of her head, which classrooms doubled as which other classrooms and how the schedule rotations worked. She was sitting 3 seats down from him now, eating efficiently, and watching the first years file in for sorting with the practiced eye of someone who'd been running things quietly for years without credit for it. The sorting hat sat on its stool. It turned its brim toward Harry, very slightly, and Harry felt that again, the sense of a very old thing paying attention. The hat opened its brim wide, its mouth, and sang. He'd been told it sang a different song each year. What he hadn't expected was for the song to be about him. Not directly, not Harry Potter, Headmaster in so many words, but there were lines in it about new growth in old ground, about foundations remembering what towers forgot, about the magic that lived in the choosing rather than the chosen. The older students exchanged glances. The first years listened with enormous eyes. Harry looked at his plate. When sorting started, he called each name himself. That hadn't been planned, he'd simply picked up the scroll when no one else reached for it, read the first name out clearly, and then the second, and by the 5th name it was simply what was happening. His voice carried in the hall without him having to raise it, which he attributed to the ceiling's acoustics. The sorting hat sorted. The houses cheered and booed with their customary loyalty. Neville caught Harry's eye from the Gryffindor table and gave him a look that was equal parts encouragement and bewilderment. Ginny Weasley, sitting 2 seats from Neville, didn't look at Harry at all. She was looking at the table, her hands in her lap, and the shadows under her eyes were deeper than summer should account for. He made a note of that. After the last first year was sorted and the food appeared, just as it always had, the house elves operating on castle time regardless of circumstance, Harry stood up. The hall quieted fast. Faster than it would have for Dumbledore, who had a habit of allowing a dignified pause before speaking. There was no dignified pause here. There was just a 12-year-old standing at the head of the hall looking out at 500 students, and every single one of them wanting to know what he was going to say. He'd thought about this during the feast. He'd thought about the kinds of speeches he'd heard, Dumbledore's oblique and poetic, McGonagall's brisk and procedural. He'd decided he wasn't doing either. I don't know, he said, exactly why the castle did what it did. I don't have a prepared speech. I don't have a 10-point plan. He paused. What I do have is this, I notice things. I'm good at noticing when something's wrong, and I'm not good at ignoring it once I've noticed. He looked around the hall, at Gryffindor, at Hufflepuff, at Ravenclaw. He let his gaze stop for a moment on the Slytherin table, where Draco Malfoy was watching him with narrowed eyes. You've all come back here because this is your school. Because something about this place matters to you. It matters to me too. I don't care about the title. I care that you're safe and that you get to learn and that things are fair. He sat back down. That's it. Eat your dinner. Several seconds of silence. Then Gryffindor erupted. Hufflepuff joined them. Ravenclaw followed a moment later, more measured but genuine. From the Slytherin table came polite, watchful quiet, and one exception, Gemma Farley, who was not applauding but was nodding slowly, the way a professional assessed a competent colleague. Ron, from across the hall, caught Harry's eye and gave him a thumbs up. Hermione was already writing something. He found the first sign at midnight. He'd meant to sleep. The headmaster's quarters were attached to the office, a set of rooms that had been emptied of Dumbledore's personal effects but still smelled of lemon drops and old smoke, and the bed was frankly spectacular in a way Harry's cot at the Dursleys was not. He'd meant to sleep and deal with everything in the morning. But he was walking the corridors first. He did this sometimes at night at the Dursleys, pacing the landing when he couldn't settle, and it had transferred here without him thinking about it. Just moving through the dark, getting the shape of a space into his body. The castle moved with him. Not in a threatening way, walls didn't close, stairs didn't shift when he was on them. More like the building was showing him things. A door standing slightly open that he'd have missed if the faint light behind it hadn't been angled just so. A portrait of a long corridor tapping its frame as he passed. A draft from a direction that had no window. He was on the 3rd floor when he found the writing. It was on a wall near a girl's bathroom, one of the out-of-the-way ones that students didn't use much because the plumbing moaned. Letters scratched into the stone, new enough that the plaster dust was still pale on the floor beneath them. Not fully legible in the dark, but enough. Harry cast lumos without thinking. The letters were in Parseltongue. He knew they were in Parseltongue because he could read them. He'd thought last year, after the dueling club incident that hadn't happened yet, that incident was this year, he reminded himself, he was ahead of his own memories in a strange way, that he didn't know any Parseltongue consciously, that it simply came out when it needed to. But standing here, reading scratches in a wall by wandlight at midnight, he found he could read every word. I am here. I am always here. Come find me. He stared at it for a long time. The bathroom door behind him creaked, very slightly, and he turned fast, wand up. It was Ginny Weasley. She was in her dressing gown, standing in the bathroom doorway, and her eyes when she saw him were wide with something that wasn't surprise. More like being caught. Her left hand had chalk dust on it. They looked at each other. Ginny, he said carefully, how long have you been in that bathroom? She opened her mouth. Closed it. For a moment he thought she was going to lie. He could see the shape of a lie assembling behind her eyes, and then something in her face broke, quietly and suddenly, the way ice broke in April, and she looked terrified. I don't know, she said. I don't know how I get places. I wake up and I'm somewhere else and I can't, her voice cracked. There's a diary, she said. It talks to me. I thought it was just, he's kind, he listens, I thought, where is it? In my dorm. Under my pillow. Okay, Harry said. Go get it. Don't touch it more than you have to. He thought for a second. Actually, wait. Don't go get it yet. Do you trust me? She looked at him. 12 years old, shadows under her eyes, chalk dust on her hand, and she looked at him with the full honest weight of a question she wasn't sure she knew the answer to. Yes, she said. Stay here, Harry said. I'm going to get Ron. He went to the Gryffindor Tower at a jog, which was 6 flights and 2 moving staircases, and he thought as he ran about Dobby's warning and about the writing on the wall and about a diary that was kind and that listened and that might be the thing that terrible plans were being made with. The castle's corridors were lit just enough as he moved through them, never dark where he was, the torches brightening as he approached and dimming as he passed, and he was certain as he'd been of very few things, that whatever was coming, the castle had put him here specifically because of what was in those walls. He was fast enough and angry enough and, for the first time in his life, unbothered enough by the idea of authority to actually do something about it. When he knocked on the portrait hole and the fat lady answered with spectacular indignation about the hour, he said simply, I'm the headmaster. Let me in. She let him in. Ron was asleep but woke immediately, a survival instinct Harry respected, born of sharing a room with the twins. He was on his feet and reaching for his wand before he was fully conscious. Trouble, he said. Ginny, Harry said. She's got something and I don't know what it is but it's bad and I need you to come with me. Ron was at the door in 4 seconds, which was the thing about Ron that people who underestimated him never understood. He processed threats to family faster than he processed almost anything else. No questions. No hesitation. They went back to the 3rd floor together. Ginny was sitting on the floor outside the bathroom with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up, and she looked up at them with something relieved in her face that made Harry's chest hurt. "Okay," Harry said, sitting down across from her on the stone floor, unceremonious, his wand in his hand. "Tell me everything about the diary." "Everything. Start from when you found it." The castle was very quiet around them. The torches burned low. Somewhere deep in the walls, something old and dark and patient breathed slowly, unaware that the person least likely to leave it alone had just started asking questions. Harry listened. And the whole time he listened, he was already thinking about what to do. He was back in the headmaster's office by 3 in the morning, the diary wrapped in 6 layers of cloth on the desk in front of him. Ginny had given it up quickly once Ron was there, given it up with something like relief, the way you put down a stone you'd been carrying without realizing, and the portraits were awake around him, and he was thinking. Dilly's Derwent said, from her frame, "You could leave it until morning." "No," Harry said. "What are you going to do with it?" He looked at the wrapped diary. "Not open it," he said, "and not let anyone else open it. Beyond that," he drummed his fingers on the desk. "I need to understand what it is. There's a professor I'd want to ask, but there are no professors." "The castle has a library," said another portrait, a thin-faced man Harry didn't know yet. "And the library has a restricted section. I need permission to access the restricted section." "Whose permission?" Harry stopped drumming his fingers. The portrait smiled. "Oh," Harry said. "Right." He wrote himself a permission slip. It took 3 tries to stop feeling ridiculous about it, and on the 4th try he stopped thinking about feeling ridiculous and just wrote it, signed it, and put his name under the word Headmaster in small, slightly self-conscious handwriting. Then he went to the library. The restricted section was exactly where it had always been, behind a low red rope, and when he stepped over it and the wards registered him, they paused, he felt them, thin wires of old magic reading him like a hand reading Braille, and then they opened, like the gates had opened, with the slow unhurried welcome of something that had simply been waiting for the right person to arrive. He found 3 books on dark objects that resembled journals before dawn broke over the castle, and he read them all, and by the time the sun came up over the mountains and the first bird started on the lake, he knew what Tom Riddle's diary was, and he knew it was dangerous in a way that made the troll in the dungeons last year look like a minor inconvenience. He also knew, sitting there in the restricted section as the early September light came through the high library windows, that the castle had shown him the diary on purpose. That Ginny being in that bathroom on that night when he was walking those particular corridors was not a coincidence. That the castle was walking him toward things it needed him to see, and that it was doing it because it trusted him to do something with what he found. That it had, in fact, put his name on that door for exactly this reason. He set the last book down. Leaned back in the chair. Looked at the ceiling. "All right," he said, quietly, to no one in particular, to the library, to the castle, to the thing that was listening in the walls and the thing in the stones that was on his side. "I've got it," he said. "I know what this is." He got up, tucked the diary under his arm, and went back upstairs. The headmaster's office was warm when he stepped in. The morning light hit the desk, the empty perch, the bookshelves, the plaque on the door. He stood in the doorway a moment, looking at it, at all of it, and then he walked to the window and looked out at the grounds, where students would start appearing for breakfast within the hour, where the lake reflected the September sky without clouds. His school. Not because it was given to him. Not because he'd asked for it. Because something in the foundations of this place had looked at the whole landscape of the wizarding world and made a calculation, and at the end of that calculation, ancient and specific and absolute, it had chosen him. He'd start with the diary. He'd get Ginny checked by Madame Pomfrey, get someone looking at that bathroom wall, get Hermione started on what she could find in the castle library about Horcruxes. That word had been in the 3rd book, and he was almost sure, almost completely sure, that was what this was. One thing at a time. He heard the first students moving in the corridors below, the shuffle and mutter of morning, and he stood up straight and rolled up his sleeves and thought, right then. The day had started. His school needed running. He had no intention of letting it down. Chapter 2, The Governing Body. The first crisis happened at breakfast. Not a monster crisis, not a dark magic crisis, a supply crisis, which was somehow both more mundane and more immediately pressing than anything Harry had planned for. He was halfway through his eggs when Gemma Farley appeared at the high table with a rolled parchment and an expression suggesting she'd been awake since 5. The greenhouses, she said, sitting down without being invited, which Harry liked about her. Professor Sprout managed them directly. The house elves maintain the kitchen gardens, but the upper greenhouses, 3 through 7, need tending by someone who knows what they're doing, or half the potion's ingredients are gone by October. Harry looked at Ron. Ron looked at Harry. Don't look at me, I'm rubbish at herbology. Neville, Harry said. He's a second year. He's the best in our year at herbology and he's been helping Sprout since he arrived. Harry paused. Actually, Gemma, who's the best herbology student in the school? Overall, not by year. Gemma unrolled her parchment and ran a finger down a column of names. 7th year Hufflepuff. Hannah Macmillan. Top marks 3 years running, she's been doing independent study in Greenhouse 6. She looked up. She'll want something in return. What does she want? To sit her herbology OWL early and use the time she'd have spent on it for independent research. Harry said, done, without hesitating, and saw Gemma's expression shift by about 2 millimeters, a very small amount, which on her face meant something. You can do that? She asked. I'm the headmaster. If I can't authorize someone to sit an exam early, the title is useless. He took a drink of pumpkin juice. What else? She had 6 more items. He worked through them over breakfast, which meant he ate while talking, and Hermione took notes because she'd appeared beside him somewhere around item 3 with parchment and a quill, efficient as a secretary who hadn't agreed to the job but was doing it anyway because someone had to. Defense against the dark arts, Gemma said. Obviously no, Professor. I'll teach it. Silence. Harry, Hermione said. What? I can. You're a student. I'm a student who faced Voldemort twice and came out the other way. I know more practical defense than anyone in this school who isn't currently locked out of the building. He kept his voice level because he meant it levelly, not bravado, just fact. Unless there's someone better. There wasn't. Nobody said so, but nobody contradicted him either. Transfiguration, Gemma continued, carefully. McGonagall's materials are still in her classroom. I'll ask the portraits if any of them were transfiguration specialists. Dilly's mentioned a few. He paused. We also have the Fat Friar, the Bloody Baron, and the Grey Lady. The Grey Lady in particular. She's intelligent and she knows this castle better than most living people do. I want to talk to her today. Hermione's quill was moving steadily. Ron had stopped eating and was leaning slightly forward, and Harry recognized the look, Ron processing something at speed, sorting through implications. The Slytherins, Ron said. Everyone looked at him. What? I'm serious. Think about it. Most of what keeps Slytherin in line is fear, fear of Snape, fear of Malfoy's dad, fear of what gets reported home. He ate a piece of toast. Without Snape, without that structure, either they fall apart or someone fills the gap. Malfoy will try to fill the gap. If he does it wrong, things get ugly fast. Gemma Farley was watching Ron with the look of someone recalibrating an assumption. You've thought about this. I've got brothers who are prefects. You hear things. Ron shrugged. I'm just saying. The other houses you can win over with results. Show them the school still works, show them things are fair. The Slytherins need something different. They need to know there's still order, that there's still structure. That there's someone actually in charge. Harry listened to all of this and thought about Gemma Farley, who was Slytherin, sitting here helping him at 7 in the morning because she'd decided to, not because anyone made her. What do you think? He asked her. She considered it. He's right about Malfoy, she said. And he's right that it needs addressing before it becomes a problem. But I'd go further, the Slytherins who aren't Malfoy, who aren't from those families, they're watching too. They want to see if you're going to treat them like Dumbledore did. How did Dumbledore treat them? A pause that was more honest than anything she could have said. Like they were a problem to be managed, she said, rather than students to be taught. Harry nodded slowly. Then I won't do that. It won't be that simple. It never is. But it starts somewhere. He found the Grey Lady in the Ravenclaw Tower corridor just after 9, drifting through a wall and then back through it with the aimless patience of someone who'd been doing the same thing for 500 years. She was different from the other ghosts, quieter, more contained, the kind of quiet that held weight in it. She stopped moving when she saw him and turned to regard him with the expression of someone who'd been approached by many headmasters and found most of them wanting. Harry Potter, she said. Her voice was like hearing something from far away. Helena Ravenclaw, he said, because he'd asked Dillies about her last night, and he'd found that people responded better when you used their name and meant it. She went very still. I'd like to talk to you, he said. Properly. Not ask you to patrol or do a task. Just talk. If you're willing. The Grey Lady floated in place for a moment, studying him with those pale eyes, and Harry had the sense of a long assessment happening very quickly. Walk with me, she said. They walked, he walked, she drifted, which amounted to the same thing, along the corridor that wrapped around the Upper East Wing, and she told him about the castle in a way the portraits couldn't. Not the structural information, the schedules and rotations. The memory of it. She'd watched Hogwarts for 5 centuries and she remembered each iteration, how it had been under her mother's guidance, how it had changed when the founder's original vision had fractured, what the school had been built to be versus what it had slowly become. Your mother, Harry said carefully, built Ravenclaw Tower because she believed learning was the highest purpose. Not learning as a competition. Not learning for status. Yes, Helena said. And within 50 years of her death, students were being ranked against each other, points were being assigned, houses were being set against houses. She looked at him sidelong. It was not what she intended. What did she intend? The Grey Lady was quiet for long enough that Harry thought she might not answer. Then she said, a place where curious minds were safe to be curious. Where the fear of being wrong didn't outweigh the joy of being right. Another pause. You can still feel it, you know. In the deep stones. What the castle was supposed to be. The enchantments your current system sits on top of, beneath all of that, there's something else. Something older. What is it? A school, she said, simply. They walked in silence after that, but it was the good kind. The owl arrived from the ministry at 10:30. Harry was in the middle of reorganizing the headmaster's office, moving furniture, making it feel less like Dumbledore's preserved shrine and more like a place where things got decided, when the tawny ministry owl came through the window and dropped a letter on his head with the kind of precision that suggested intention. He opened it. Dear Mr. Potter, the Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Education has convened an emergency session regarding the current situation at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Senior Undersecretary Dolores Umbridge will be arriving at the castle on September 3rd to conduct an assessment of the school's current governance structure and to advise on appropriate next steps. Your cooperation is expected. Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic. Harry read it twice, then set it on the desk. Hermione, he said. She was sitting cross-legged in the corner chair she'd claimed over the course of the morning, surrounded by 3 books and a growing stack of notes. What do you know about Dolores Umbridge? Hermione looked up with the expression she wore when she knew exactly who someone was and the information wasn't good. Senior Undersecretary. Fudge's right hand. She has a very particular view of how Hogwarts should operate, specifically, that it should operate in a way that reflects ministry priorities. A pause. She once lobbied to have Muggle studies removed from the curriculum. She believes in what she calls appropriate magical education, which broadly means teaching students to be manageable rather than capable. And she's coming here in 2 days to assess me. To assess the situation, technically. Right. Harry folded the letter and put it under a paperweight. Let her come. We'll be ready. What does ready look like? He thought about it. It looks like a school that's working. Class is happening. Students learning. Everything running smoothly enough that there's nothing for her to point at. He picked up a quill and added to the list he'd been building since dawn. The best counter to someone who's coming here to find a problem is to not have problems. Hermione looked at him over her book. You realize we've been at this for 1 day. And we've sorted the greenhouses, established a prefect council, identified 3 portrait staff who can cover transfiguration and charms theory, dealt with the Ginny situation, and started untangling whatever is in the walls of this school. He looked up. I'd say that's a reasonable first day. She stared at him for a moment. Then she went back to her books, but he could see the curve of a smile at the corner of her mouth. The problem with Draco Malfoy was that he wasn't stupid. Harry had always known this in the abstract, had known that the pointed, sharp-edged boy from the robe shop existed in a context where power mattered and intelligence was the tool you used to hold on to it. But knowing it abstractly was different from watching Draco work, which is what Harry found himself doing in the hour before lunch. Draco had called a meeting. Not officially, no posted notice, no formal request, but Harry had eyes in the castle now that he hadn't had before, specifically in the form of several portraits that communicated through the network of frames running through every room and corridor, and Dilly's had passed along, with the dry factual tone she applied to everything, that Draco Malfoy was currently in an unused classroom on the 4th floor with 11 other students and had been speaking for 20 minutes. Should I send someone? Gemma asked, standing in the office doorway. No, Harry said. I'll go. He went alone. Down 4 flights, through the corridor with the squeaky 3rd flagstone, he was already memorizing the building's specific idiosyncrasies, and he stood outside the classroom door and listened for a moment. He could hear Draco's voice through the wood, clipped and precise, with the confidence of someone who'd been raised to believe that rooms full of people listening to him was simply the natural state of things. Can't force the ministry's hand if we're playing along. The leverage is in the disruption. If the school visibly doesn't function, the ministry has grounds to step in, restore proper governance, and this whole embarrassing situation. Harry opened the door. 12 faces turned to look at him. Mostly Slytherin, 2 Ravenclaws, 1 Hufflepuff he recognized from the prefect meeting. Draco was standing at the front of the room with his arms folded, and his expression when Harry walked in went through 3 things fast: surprise, calculation, contempt, the contempt landing on top like a finishing coat. Potter, he said. Malfoy. Harry looked around the room. Don't stop on my account. Nobody said anything. The Hufflepuff in the back looked like he wanted to leave. You were saying, Harry continued, stepping further into the room, that the leverage is in the disruption. That if the school doesn't function, the ministry has grounds to come in. He stopped in the middle of the room and looked at Draco directly. That's a smart strategy. It would probably work, too, if I wasn't already aware of it. Draco's jaw was tight. This isn't your meeting. No, it's yours. And you've got every right to hold it. Harry looked around at the assembled students again, not threatening, not performing. Just looking, making contact. You've all got every right to be unhappy with this situation. It's strange and it's unexpected, and for some of you it probably feels like a personal attack on things you care about. He paused. But I want to ask you something, and I'd actually like an honest answer. What is it, specifically, that you think I'm going to do to you? Silence. No really, he said. Not what Malfoy told you. Not what your parents old. What do you personally think is going to happen that you don't want to happen? Another silence. Then one of the Ravenclaws, a girl, 3rd year by the look of her, with the slightly desperate precision of someone who'd been trained to have opinions, said, "Standards. Everyone knows Gryffindors get favoritism. I gave Slytherin the highest point total in the first prefect meeting this morning," Harry said. Gemma Farley identified 17 procedural efficiencies in the school's schedule that no one had addressed for 15 years, and I gave her house the credit for it. "Did you hear about that?" A pause. Several people looked at Draco, who looked at Harry, and in that look was a very fast and very genuine recalculation. Not agreement. Not backing down. Just an adjustment. Like a chess player who'd made an opening move and was now revising the middle game. "It's one morning," Draco said. "Yes," Harry agreed. "Come back after a week. If I've been unfair, tell me and I'll fix it. If I've been fair, then we don't have a problem." He looked around the room one more time. "I'm not asking anyone to be happy about this. I'm asking you to wait and see." He turned to go. "Oh, and, the classroom's yours. I wasn't canceling your meeting. I just wanted to be there for the part about me." He walked out and left the door open behind him. Halfway down the corridor he heard the murmur of voices starting again, confused, argumentative, and noticeably lacking the sharp conviction they'd had when he'd arrived. He kept walking. Classes started in the afternoon with the practical reality of a schedule and nobody to teach it. Harry had solved parts of this during the morning, the portraits, for theory. Hannah Macmillan for herbology. Himself for defense against the dark arts, which he'd scheduled for every year first, because if something was in the castle walls, he wanted every student at least half prepared before it showed itself. But potions was the wall he kept running into. Snape's classroom was locked in a way that went beyond an ordinary locking charm. It was sealed with something layered and personal, tied to Snape's own magical signature, and not even the castle's cooperation was getting it open without the right touch. The ingredient stores were in there. The textbooks were in there. Half the equipment was in there. He was standing outside the dungeon classroom at 2 in the afternoon with Hermione, both of them looking at the door with identical expressions of mild frustration, when Ron appeared at the top of the dungeon stairs. "Found something," he said. "Come up to the library." They followed him to a corner of the library's east section, where Ron had commandeered a table and stacked it with what looked like old administrative records, leather-bound ledgers, thick with dust, the kind of documents that lived in archives because nobody was sure whether to keep them or throw them away. "What is this?" Hermione asked, reaching for the top ledger with the automatic reflex of someone who could not be in proximity to an unopened book. "School records from before Snape," Ron said. "I was looking for an equipment list, like, what does a potions classroom even need, right, in case we had to source it elsewhere, and I found these." He flipped to a bookmarked page. "Look. 1980, Potions Professor, Horace Slughorn." He turned pages. "Retired in 81. Then there's a 2-year gap where potions is listed as being taught by a series of short-term appointments, and then from 83 it's just Snape." He looked up. "And here's the interesting bit, there's a full materials inventory from Slughorn's last year. Every ingredient, every piece of equipment, the quantities, the storage locations." He paused. "And there's a secondary stores room. Not the main dungeon classroom. An older one." Hermione was already reading over his shoulder. "Level B2, she said. That's below the dungeons. And it's listed under castle infrastructure, not under Snape's personal inventory, which means it wouldn't be covered by his personal locking charm." Ron sat back with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd done a genuinely useful thing and knew it. "Thought you'd want to know." Harry looked at the page, then at Ron. "How did you know to look for this?" "I didn't," Ron said. "I was hungry, I was looking at the kitchen records to see what the elves were making for dinner, and one thing led to another." He shrugged. "Fred and George always said the real map of Hogwarts wasn't the one the Marauders drew. It's in the administration files." "They were right," Harry said. Ron looked pleased in the way that he always did when the twins were credited with something useful, a mixture of sibling pride and personal vindication. The secondary stores room was exactly where the record said it was, down a second staircase off the main dungeon corridor, behind a door that the castle opened for Harry without hesitation, into a low-ceilinged room lined with shelves and the particular cold that preserved organic materials. Enough ingredients for a full school year, catalogued and sealed in preservation jars. Equipment redundancies. 2 full sets of brass scales. Harry stood in the middle of it and felt, for the first time since September 1st, something that was almost like things were going to be okay. "We still need someone to teach it," Hermione said, practical as ever. "I know." He looked at the shelves. "But at least we've got materials. That buys us time." He turned around. Gemma mentioned a 7th year who tutors potions informally. The one who helped 3 Ravenclaws pass their OWL. Marcus Webb, Gemma's voice said from behind them, and they all turned to find her in the doorway with the same parchment she'd had at breakfast, looking only slightly surprised that they'd found this room. "He's good. Better than good. He applied to an apprenticeship with the Potions Guild and didn't get it because Snape refused to write him a recommendation." Something went still in Harry's chest. "Why? Webb is Muggle-born." Nobody said anything for a moment. The cold in the room felt different. "Where is he now?" Harry asked. "Common room, probably. It's a free period." "Get him," Harry said. "Please." Marcus Webb was 17, tall and careful moving, with the kind of precise economy that Harry associated with people who'd learned early that other people were watching them and looking for mistakes. He came into the store's room with the wary look of someone summoned by authority who'd learned to expect the worst from authority, and when Harry showed him the room, just walked him in, just let him see it, something shifted in his face that he immediately tried to contain, and didn't quite manage. "I'd like you to teach potions," Harry said. "If you want to. I'm not ordering you to." Webb looked at the shelves, then at Harry. "I'm a student. So am I. We're both doing things we weren't exactly trained for." Harry met his eyes. "I'll write you whatever credential documentation you need for after Hogwarts. Official school record, signed by the headmaster. The Potions Guild can sort themselves out." Webb was quiet for a long moment. "I'd want to redesign the curriculum," he said finally. 3rd year and up. Snape spent half his time on punitive exercises and the other half on things with no practical application. There's a whole branch of restorative potions that's never on the syllabus. "Do it," Harry said. Webb looked at him for another moment, recalibrating, that same readjustment Harry had seen in Gemma's face, in the Ravenclaw girl's face, in various places across the first day, the look of someone revising an expectation. "Okay," he said. The first defense against the dark arts class happened at 4 o'clock and ran over by 25 minutes because nobody wanted to leave. Harry had spent the free period between lunch and the class thinking about what to teach and then deciding to stop thinking about it and just teach what he knew, which turned out to be the right approach. He walked into the classroom, 2nd years, 1st class, with his wand and no notes and a chair placed backward to the class, which he sat on facing them with his arms across the back, and he said, "I'm going to tell you something that no one else in this school will tell you, which is that defense against the dark arts isn't about knowing the most spells. It's about being willing to use what you know when it counts." He looked around the room. "Most of you have the spells. You've been taught them. You just haven't been taught to trust yourselves. So that's what we're doing today." What followed was 2 hours of controlled practical work, warding exercises, shield charms, real-time reaction practice where Harry moved around the room casting harmless disarming spells without warning so students had to respond in real time. He corrected without embarrassing. He demonstrated with himself as the target, letting 4th-year Neville Longbottom hit him with a disarming charm and then grinning when the spell worked better than either of them expected. He told them, plainly and without drama, about what he'd encountered in the dungeons last year. Not a boast, just a case study. "This is what happened. This is what I did. This is what I'd do differently." By the time the class spilled over its allotted time, The room was crackling with the particular energy of students who discovered they were more capable than they'd been allowed to feel, and Harry dismissed them with the reminder that the class would run 3 times a week for all years, and that anyone who wanted to run additional practice sessions could request the use of the third-floor classroom on evenings. By the time he got back to the office, there were already 17 names on the additional practice list, signed in ink that the castle's enchantments had helpfully manifested as a parchment pinned to the office door. Dinner was chaotic in the best way, students talking across house tables, a thing that happened rarely and today was everywhere, the natural consequence of a day that had scrambled all the ordinary social rules. Harry ate quickly, kept one ear on the room, and made notes. He noticed 3 things. First, Draco Malfoy wasn't talking to his usual group. He was sitting at the Slytherin table eating in silence, and once, when Harry looked over, Draco was looking back, and their eyes met for a moment, nothing friendly in it, but something that wasn't quite purely hostile anymore. Something that had shifted from the meeting this morning. Second, Ginny was eating, which she hadn't been at breakfast, and she was talking to a red-haired girl beside her, and her hands were in her lap rather than under the table, which meant she wasn't writing when she thought no one was looking. Third, Peeves had come back, and was currently hanging upside down from the enchanted ceiling blowing raspberries at the Slytherin prefects, but when Harry looked at him directly, Peeves straightened up and gave him something that was, not a salute. More of an acknowledgement. Then he went back to the raspberries. Harry didn't know exactly what to do with being acknowledged by Peeves, but he filed it. After dinner, in the office, with the portraits watching and Hermione cross-legged in her chair and Ron stretched on the long sofa he dragged in from somewhere, Harry spread out 3 parchments on the desk. One was the Dobby warning, written from memory. One was a description of the writing on the wall. One was the wrapped diary, which he still hadn't moved, sitting at the corner of the desk like something quietly breathing. Horcrux, Hermione said. She'd said the word carefully, like handling glass. She'd found the same chapter Harry had found in the restricted section, and she'd read further than he had, which was why her face had had a particular shade to it all day. That's what the book implied. What's a Horcrux? Ron asked. A piece of a soul, Hermione said. Put into an object. By someone who, she stopped. By someone who's done something terrible enough to fracture their own soul. Ron sat up slowly. Tom Riddle, Harry said. The diary has a name written on the inside cover, Hermione said. I saw it when Ginny brought it. Tom Marvolo Riddle. She met Harry's eyes. If Voldemort made this, then someone put it in Ginny's possession on purpose, Harry said. Someone who had access to it. Someone who wanted it inside the school. The 3 of them sat with that for a moment. Ron said, Malfoy. Maybe, Harry said. We can't know yet. He looked at the diary. What we know is that this thing has been talking to Ginny. Writing to her. Building, something. And that it's connected to whatever is in the walls of this school. He pressed his fingers to his temples. The writing was in Parseltongue. I'm the only person in this building who can read Parseltongue, which means if there are more messages, I'm the one who has to find them. Is it possible, Hermione said, slowly, that the castle showed you that writing specifically because of that? Harry thought about the way the corridor had lit up. The bathroom door creaking. Ginny's face. Yes, he said. Then it knew, Ron said, that you'd need to be here. Not Dumbledore. Not any adult. Someone who could read Parseltongue and who would actually do something when they found it. The room was quiet. That's why, Harry said. Not loud. Not triumphant. Just understanding landing. That's why the castle chose me. Not because I'm powerful. Because I'm the specific person this specific problem needs. Hermione was watching him with an expression that was more complicated than he expected. Not disagreement. Something more like, that, and more than that. But she didn't say it, and he didn't press her, because some things were better understood gradually. Okay, Harry said, pulling all 3 parchments toward him and picking up a quill. "Here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we do next." He drew 3 columns. "Tell me when I'm wrong." They worked until past 10, the 3 of them at the desk and the sofa and the corner chair, firelight warming the old stone, the portrait sleeping quietly around them, and the castle settling into the particular silence of a building that has, for the first time in a long time, something like hope in its foundations. Outside, the grounds were dark and still. The lake reflected stars. Deep in the walls, something old and dark waited, unaware that 3 12-year-olds had already named it and were already, systematically, planning to take it apart. In the corridor on the 2nd floor, a stone-still, horror-struck ghost hung frozen in the air over a puddle of water, but the night was quiet, and no one had found her yet. That would come. But tonight, the school held. Tonight, they worked. And when Harry finally walked back to the headmaster's quarters and lay down in the oversized bed and looked at the ceiling, he felt something he hadn't felt since Privet Drive, something clean and purposeful and entirely without apology. He was where he was supposed to be. He closed his eyes, and the castle settled around him like a living thing, and for the first time in his life, Harry Potter slept in a room that felt like his. Chapter 3, The Siege. The Ministry Owl arrived at dawn. Not one owl, 7, flying in formation with the particular bureaucratic precision of birds that had been trained specifically for official correspondence, each carrying a component of a single over-engineered document that assembled itself on the headmaster's desk when all 7 pieces landed simultaneously. Harry watched the parchments click together like puzzle pieces and thought that whoever had designed this delivery system had more time than sense. The assembled document was 3 feet long. The summary at the top was 4 words: "Vacate the premises immediately." He read the full thing over breakfast, which Hermione had taken to bringing up to the office on a tray because they both pretended this was more efficient than Harry eating in the Great Hall, and really it was because they had too much to talk about in the mornings to waste time walking downstairs. "They're invoking Section 14 of the 1754 Educational Governance Act," Hermione said, reading over his shoulder. She'd been waiting for him to get to that part. "It gives the Ministry emergency authority to assume temporary control of any magical educational institution deemed to be operating outside established parameters." Which was written, Dilly said from her portrait, without preamble, by a minister who wanted control of Hogwarts and couldn't get it any other way. She was eating a painted apple with small, precise bites. "It's been contested 3 times. It's never been successfully invoked." "Because the castle blocks it?" Harry asked. "Because the castle blocks it," she confirmed. Harry set the document down. "Then why send it?" "Because Fudge doesn't know that," Hermione said. "Or," she hesitated. "He knows it historically. He might be hoping the circumstances are different this time." "The circumstances are different," Harry said. "The castle evicted everyone and put a 12-year-old in charge. From Fudge's perspective, that might read as the castle's protections being down rather than actively reasserted." Hermione looked at him. "When did you start thinking like a politician?" "I'm not thinking like a politician. I'm thinking like someone who grew up with the Dursleys." He folded the document and put it beside the diary. "When someone bigger than you wants to take something from you, they always tell a story about how it's actually better for you. Fudge's story is that Hogwarts needs to be saved from the chaos. Which means his first move is to make the chaos visible." He stood up. "Umbridge arrives today. I want the school running better than it has in years when she walks through those gates. That's a high bar." "Good." He taught 2 classes before Umbridge arrived. The first was 3rd-year defense, which ran with the same charged energy as the 2nd-year class the previous day, students who'd spent a year being told that the subject was theoretical discovering that it didn't have to be. He'd added something new, a section at the end where he asked the class what they were frightened of, practically, in terms of magic. What situations? What spells? He wrote the answers on the board without comment, and by the time he'd listed 8 things, the class was already solving them collaboratively, older students advising younger, and Harry was mostly just pointing at people and keeping the discussion from going in circles. He overheard, walking out, a third-year girl saying to her friend, "He doesn't teach like a teacher." Her friend said, "What does he teach like?" And the first girl thought about it and said, "Someone who actually wants us to be able to do it." The second class was first-year flying, which wasn't on any curriculum but which Harry had added to the schedule because he remembered his own first lesson with Madame Hooch and how the broom had come up before she'd finished calling his name, and he'd thought, these kids should know that feeling. Every single one of them. Not as a privilege, not as a sport, but as something fundamental to who they were and what magic meant. He had 43 first years on broomsticks on the front lawn at 10:30, and whatever else was happening at Hogwarts that day, the sound that came off that lawn for the next hour was pure unfiltered joy, the kind that had no agenda. He was watching a small Hufflepuff girl achieve 3 feet of altitude for the first time, both fists raised in triumph, when he felt the shift at the gate. Not heard, felt. The castle's warmth and the stone walls did something that was almost like a sharp exhale, and Harry turned and looked toward the front gates and saw the carriages coming up the road. 3 of them. Ministry colors. "All right," he called to the class. "Land safely, return your brooms to the rack, you've all done brilliantly." He was already moving toward the path to the gates. "Neville, can you supervise the landing? You know what you're doing." Neville Longbottom, who had landed his broom neatly 5 minutes ago and had been hovering at medium height watching the others with genuine encouragement, descended and said, "Yeah, course," with the straightforward competence he showed whenever nobody made a fuss about asking him. Harry met the carriages at the gate. There were 9 of them. 6 ministry officials in formal robes, 2 Aurors in the distinctive scarlet of active duty patrol, and Dolores Umbridge, who stepped out of the central carriage and looked at Hogwarts the way a person looks at a property they're considering purchasing, assessing, calculating, already seeing the changes they'd make. She was shorter than Harry had pictured her from Hermione's description. Pink cardigan. Tight curled hair. A face shaped by the lifetime habit of smiling at things she didn't like because the smile communicated contempt more efficiently than a frown. She turned the smile on Harry and it was exactly as described. "Harry," she said, warmly, as if they knew each other. "How lovely." "Undersecretary Umbridge," Harry said. "Welcome to Hogwarts." She paused, clearly expecting either nervousness or aggression, and getting neither. He just stood there, which seemed to disconcert her more than both. "We've come on behalf of the ministry," she said, the warmth staying in place like paint on a wall. "I'm sure you've received the documentation." "I have." He stepped aside from the gate and gestured. "Come in." She walked through, the officials behind her, the Aurors last. The Aurors, Harry noticed, were looking at the castle the way people who dealt with powerful magic for a living looked at powerful magic, with professional respect rather than dismissal. "Good." He filed that. "I thought we might start with a tour," Umbridge said, turning to survey the grounds. "Get a sense of the current state of things." "Of course," Harry said. "Follow me." He took them everywhere. Not because he had nothing to hide, he didn't, but because the best way to preempt someone looking for problems was to show them everything before they found the angle they wanted. He walked them through the great hall, where the enchanted ceiling was doing something particularly beautiful in the late morning light. Through the library, where students were working quietly in clusters, Hermione's new open-access system for the restricted section, not fully open, but with a clear request process Harry had posted, visible on the wall. Through 3 classrooms, 2 of which had ongoing lessons. He'd timed the tour so they'd pass Marcus Webb's potions classroom at the exact moment Webb had the second years attempting a moderate complexity restorative potion, and through the window in the door, which Harry opened briefly, just enough for Umbridge and her entourage to see, 24 students were working in focused pairs, and the room smelled of something clean and faintly medicinal rather than the scorched anxiety of Snape-era classes. Umbridge smiled at everything. Made small approving sounds. And watched Harry the whole time with those calculating eyes. "And the staffing situation," she said, at last, as they arrived back in the entrance hall. How is that being managed? Effectively, Harry said. Specifically, though. She tilted her head. You have no qualified professors. I have experienced practitioners teaching the subjects they know best. I have 7th years with exceptional NEWT level knowledge supporting subject areas. I have the castle's portrait network, which includes several former professors, available for theoretical instruction. He held her gaze. And I have a student body that is, on the basis of the last 2 days, more engaged than the records suggest they've been in some time. One of the ministry officials, a thin man with a clipboard who'd been writing things down since they arrived, looked up from his parchment at that, and Harry caught the flicker of something genuine in his expression before it went back to neutral. The ministry's position, Umbridge said, is that qualified adult oversight is necessary for the safe operation of a school. The ministry's position is one perspective, Harry said, pleasantly. The castle's position appears to be different. Her smile went tight at the edges. The castle doesn't have legal standing. Respectfully, Harry said, it seems to disagree. As if on cue, and Harry was not entirely sure it wasn't on cue, because the castle had timing he was beginning to trust implicitly. Every door in the entrance hall swung smoothly shut and the temperature rose by 2 degrees, which was the building version of someone straightening up in their chair. The Auror on the left touched his wand. You can put that away, Harry said, without looking at him. The castle isn't threatening you. It's reminding you that it's here. The Auror, after a beat, moved his hand away from his wand. Umbridge looked at Harry with the first genuine expression she'd shown since arriving, not the contemptuous warmth, not the calculating assessment. Something that might have been, buried under 20 years of institutional habit, actual surprise. I'd like a private meeting, she said. With you. This afternoon. You can have an hour, Harry said. 2 o'clock. My office. Between the tour and the meeting, 3 things happened. The first was a ministry owl intercepted by, not Harry, because the owl hadn't been addressed to Harry, Gemma Farley, who brought it straight to the office with a face that communicated she'd read it and wasn't happy. The letter was addressed to the Slytherin prefects collectively. It was from an office in the ministry's Department of Magical Education that Harry didn't recognize, and its tone was coded in the careful way of things that weren't official but were meant to produce official outcomes. It suggested that Slytherin House, as the house most impacted by the current governance instability, might benefit from communicating their concerns directly to the ministry, and that any formal grievances submitted by prefects of appropriate standing would be given priority consideration. They're trying to build a case, Gemma said. Get grievances on record. Student welfare concerns is the legal basis they need if the castle keeps blocking Section 14. Did they send this to the other houses? No. Harry looked at the letter for a long time. Malfoy? He hasn't seen it yet. It arrived this morning. But, she hesitated. But if he does see it, Harry said, he'll use it. He'll use it even if the content is manufactured, Gemma said. His father has ministry contacts. This is how that family works, you don't fight frontally, you build documentation. Harry sat back. He thought about Dobby in his bedroom in July, enormous eyes full of terror, warning him away. He thought about the diary. He thought about Lucius Malfoy's access to artifacts dark enough to fragment a soul. Gemma, he said. If I tell you something in confidence, does it stay in confidence? She looked at him steadily. Yes. I think Lucius Malfoy gave a dark object to a student in this school deliberately, with the intention of causing harm. I can't prove it yet. When I can prove it, I'm going to act on it. He met her eyes. I'm telling you because you need to know that when I come after Draco's father, it won't be because of politics or favoritism. It'll be because he hurt someone. The silence in the room was long. How sure are you? She asked. Mostly sure. She nodded once. Then I'll keep the peace on my end until you're ready. The second thing that happened was Snape. Harry was in the corridor between the Great Hall and the library at 12:30 when he rounded a corner and nearly walked into Severus Snape, who was standing in the corridor outside the castle's entrance to the dungeons, standing, not walking, as if he'd been there a while, and the expression on his face was nothing Harry had seen on it before. Not cold. Not contemptuous. Something rawer that went away very fast when Harry appeared, replaced by the familiar blade edge of contained fury. But in the second before the mask went up, Harry saw it, and he filed it. "You're on castle grounds," Harry said. "I am aware," Snape said. "The castle let you in." A pause. "Apparently." Harry looked at him. Snape looked at Harry. The dungeon door was 3 feet from Snape's left hand. The locking enchantment that Harry and Hermione hadn't been able to crack was on that door. The stores they needed were behind it. "The potions classroom," Harry said. "You sealed it." "My materials." "My classroom." "The school's materials," Harry said. "Your classroom by assignment, which has been vacated." He kept his voice flat. "I need those stores." "Then you should have considered that before the castle made its catastrophically poor decision." "I didn't choose this." "No," Snape said, something dark and complicated moving through his voice. "You never choose anything, do you, Potter? Things simply happen to you, and the rest of us manage the consequences." It was the kind of thing designed to provoke, and Harry recognized it as such, and so he didn't let it. He let it land and looked at Snape with the particular steadiness that came from already knowing what you wanted and not needing to be angry to get it. "I know you're angry," Harry said. "You have every right to be. This is your school too, you've given years to it. And I'm not here to argue about that." He paused. "But I've got 431 students who need potions instruction and stores that are locked behind that door, and I've got a girl in this school who is being manipulated by a dark artifact that someone in Slytherin's orbit put in her hands." He watched Snape's face. "I think you'd want to know about that." Something moved in Snape's expression that was impossible to categorize. He was very still for a moment. "The Weasley girl," he said. Slowly, like something being calculated. "Yes." Another silence. Outside, through the high dungeon windows, the sky was going the gray of incoming weather. Snape reached into his robes, produced a long black key, and held it out. Not graciously. Not warmly. He held it out the way someone conceded a point while making clear that the concession meant nothing about the war. Harry took it. "You'll have the room inventoried and returned to original condition," Snape said. "Yes. And if you're incorrect about the artifact, I'm not." Snape looked at him for a long moment. The mask was fully in place, but behind it, barely, the faintest edge of something that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite the opposite. "No," Snape said. "I don't suppose you are." He turned and walked back the way he'd come, and Harry stood in the corridor holding the key, and the castle's walls were a degree warmer than they'd been a minute ago. The third thing that happened was Dumbledore. Harry found him sitting in the entrance hall on a stone bench with the patient air of someone who'd been there long enough to get comfortable, wearing traveling robes and a hat that was slightly too large, his half-moon spectacles catching the gray afternoon light. He was reading a small book and eating from a paper bag of sherbet lemons as though he hadn't been expelled from his own school 2 days ago. "Harry," he said, pleasantly. "You're looking well." "Professor," Harry said, stopping a few feet away. "Albus, please." He offered the paper bag. Harry shook nothing from a paper bag of sweets from a person who'd once taught him the trick of walking into a room like you owned it. "Sit down, Harry." Harry sat. Not because Dumbledore had said to, because he wanted to. Because Dumbledore was one of the most genuinely intelligent people he'd ever encountered and the situation required that he treat this conversation accordingly. "How are you finding it?" Dumbledore asked. "Managing. I'm sure." He folded the bag over and put it in his pocket. "Do you know why the castle chose you?" "I have a theory." Several theories, I imagine. Dumbledore looked at the castle's entrance with the expression of someone looking at something they loved. Would you like to know mine? Yes, Harry said honestly. I made mistakes, Dumbledore said, and said it simply, without drama, which was somehow more arresting than drama would have been. Many mistakes over many years. Some I knew were mistakes and made anyway, because I believed the larger picture justified them. And some, he paused, I made because I confused my own judgment with the school's best interest, and never questioned the difference. He looked at Harry. The castle doesn't forget. It simply waits. It's been waiting for me. It's been waiting for someone, Dumbledore said. Someone who leads because the situation requires it rather than because they built a structure to ensure it. Someone whose first instinct is not self-preservation. He smiled. You have many of your mother's qualities, Harry. Her particular brand of courage, which is not the absence of fear, as people tend to romanticize it, but the absolute refusal to let fear become a reason. Harry was quiet for a moment. Are you here to ask for it back? The school. No, Dumbledore said. I'm here because something dark is in the walls of this building, and you know what it is, and I wanted to tell you in person that you're right about what it is. And that you're right that you need to deal with it. Harry turned to look at him. You know about the diary. I suspected, for some time, that Lucius Malfoy possessed it. I was never able to prove it. He met Harry's eyes. You may be able to. You have advantages I didn't. The Parseltongue. That, yes. And the castle's trust. He stood, straightening his robes. I will not interfere with what you're building here, Harry. It's genuine, and it's good, and the last thing it needs is me managing it. He picked up his hat. But if you need me, I'm at the Hog's Head. Aberforth makes terrible coffee and won't stop telling me, but the room is comfortable. He paused. One more thing. Harry looked up. Umbridge, Dumbledore said. Be very careful. She is not stupid and she is not powerless, and she has been building a case for ministry control of this school for longer than you've known this school existed. Don't let her find a lever. He looked at Harry for a moment with the full weight of eyes that had watched generations. I think you already know this. I wanted to say it anyway. He walked to the gate, which opened for him, just enough to let him pass, and then closed again. Harry sat on the bench for another minute. Then he went upstairs to get ready for Umbridge. The 2 o'clock meeting was the most enjoyable diplomatic conversation Harry had ever had, which was admittedly a low bar since it was also the only diplomatic conversation Harry had ever had. Umbridge sat across his desk in the visitor's chair with a clipboard and a smile and 7 prepared questions that she moved through with the systematic efficiency of someone who'd done this kind of assessment before. Harry answered all of them. Directly. Completely. He didn't hedge and he didn't obscure and he didn't let the smile make him perform nervousness he didn't feel. She asked about staffing. He told her exactly who was teaching what and why they were qualified. She asked about safety protocols. He told her about the prefect network, the portrait oversight system, the specific procedure he'd put in place for student movement after dark, which was, functionally, more rigorous than what the previous administration had used, because it was designed around actual risk assessment rather than tradition. She asked about curriculum. He told her about the curriculum changes, and when she smiled at the mention of Marcus Webb with the specific tightness of someone who disapproved but couldn't say of what, Harry simply moved on to the next item before she had a chance to press. She asked, finally, about the nature of his authority, and this was the lever Dumbledore had warned about, and Harry recognized it landing. The Ministry's concern, she said, pleasantly, is that whatever the castle's enchantments may have done, it does not have the legal authority to appoint a headmaster. Educational appointments fall under the Ministry's purview. Then the Ministry should take that up with the castle, Harry said. Not with me. The castle doesn't attend Ministry meetings. No, Harry agreed. It doesn't. Which has been the castle's position for about 1,000 years, as I understand it. The smile faltered. Not much, just a millimeter of tightness at the corners. But it was there. Harry, she said, with the particular gentleness of someone speaking to someone they've decided to treat as a child. You must understand that this isn't sustainable. A 12-year-old, however capable, cannot. I stopped a mountain troll in my first week at Hogwarts, Harry said. I stopped your predecessor from giving Voldemort his body back. I've identified a dark artifact in this school that's been attacking a student. I've found the stores your ministry's approved potions professor locked away from 400 students out of spite, and I've had 3 days. He kept his voice entirely neutral. With respect, Undersecretary, I'd like to see the evidence that your preferred alternative would have done better. Complete silence. One of the ministry officials outside, she'd left the door open deliberately, Harry had noticed, so they could hear, made a sound that was hastily converted into a cough. Umbridge looked at him across the desk for a long moment, and what Harry saw in her face during that moment was important, not defeat, not retreat. Adjustment. The recalibration of a long-term approach. I'll be filing my assessment with the minister, she said, standing. The ministry will remain involved in the oversight of this institution. The ministry is welcome to be involved, Harry said, standing as well. I'm not running a secret operation. Come back whenever you like. The school will be running. She left with her team. The Aurors were last out, and the one who'd reached for his wand at the gate paused in the doorway and looked back at Harry with an expression that was entirely genuine. For what it's worth, he said, good meeting. Harry nodded. The Auror left. At 6 o'clock, Draco Malfoy knocked on the headmaster's office door. Harry was alone. Ron and Hermione had gone to dinner, the portraits were in various states of post-afternoon dozing, and he was writing a letter he wasn't finished thinking about yet, to Lucius Malfoy, carefully worded. He hadn't sent it. He hadn't decided to send it. He was just writing it because sometimes you needed to put the thing in words before you could decide what to do with it. Draco knocked. Harry said, "Come in." Draco walked in with the posture of someone who'd practiced this entrance, upright, measured, not aggressive but not submissive. He stood in front of the desk the way someone stood when they weren't sure whether they were guest or supplicant and had decided to behave as if neither. "I need to talk to you," Draco said. "Okay," Harry said. "About the letter from the ministry." Harry waited. Draco's jaw moved. "I received it. The one about filing grievances." "I know." A pause. "My father will expect me to use it." "I know that too." Another pause. Draco looked at the desk, at the bookshelves, at anywhere but Harry, with the specific avoidance of someone performing nonchalance while doing something that cost them. "If there's a dark object in this school," Draco said, carefully, connected to a student being affected, he stopped. Harry didn't move. Didn't speak. "Ginny Weasley," Draco said. The name came out precise and stripped of its usual contempt, which was how Harry knew this was real and not a performance. "She looked wrong at the feast. She's looked wrong since the train." "I know," Harry said quietly. I'm not saying anything about my father." Fast. Hard. "I'm not saying that. I'm just," he stopped again. The practiced posture was slipping, just slightly, at the edges. "If there's something I should have noticed, something that was," he couldn't finish the sentence. Harry looked at him. In that moment, Draco Malfoy standing in his office, unable to finish a sentence because the sentence ended somewhere he hadn't prepared himself to go, Harry understood something about Draco that he hadn't before. Not sympathy, exactly. Something more complicated. The recognition that a person shaped by a world that rewarded cruelty could still flinch, privately, at where cruelty led. "I can't tell you anything about the investigation," Harry said. "But I can tell you that Ginny is being looked after, and that the thing that was hurting her is in this office and isn't hurting anyone right now." Draco looked at the desk. His eyes stopped on the cloth-wrapped diary. Just for a second. But Harry saw it. And Draco, seeing that Harry saw, looked away. Neither of them said anything. "The ministry letter," Harry said. "What are you going to do with it?" Draco was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Nothing," and it sounded like it cost him something real, something that would have consequences somewhere beyond these walls. "I'm going to do nothing with it." He turned and walked to the door. "Malfoy," Harry said. Draco stopped. "Whatever your father put in Ginny's possession, when I can prove it, I'm going to act on it. I want you to be ready for that." Draco's shoulders were very still. "I know," he said. And left. At 9 o'clock that night, Harry was on his third sweep of the second-floor corridor. He'd been sweeping the corridors every night since finding the writing on the wall, methodical and silent, wand in hand, the Lumos charm throwing familiar light across stone. He was learning the way he'd once learned the lanes around Privet Drive, by instinct and repetition. The castle showed him things on these sweeps. Little things, mostly, a door subtly warped, a portrait whose eyes tracked him differently, the odd draft. Tonight it showed him something bigger. He was rounding the corner near the girls' bathroom when he felt the cold. Not temperature cold, magic cold, the specific chill of something that had been active and left a trace. He stopped. Looked. The corridor was empty, but the floor was wet. Not rain. There were no windows here. He followed the water trail to its source, and what he found stopped him in place. Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, hung suspended in midair by her tail, frozen solid with her eyes wide and her fur stiff, and every indication that she had seen something that human eyes weren't meant to see. On the wall above her, in letters that hadn't been there this morning, written in Parseltongue again but this time also in English, the same line in both languages: "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." Harry stood under it for a long time, reading both versions, and the English one confirmed what the Parseltongue told him, that whatever was in the walls wasn't waiting anymore. It was moving. He looked at the frozen cat. He looked at the writing. He thought about Tom Riddle's diary wrapped in cloth on his desk. He thought about Ginny's hollow eyes. He thought about the castle, which had put him here, which had walked him toward this, which had, he understood now, been trying to get someone to this point for 50 years, since the last time the chamber had been opened, and Dumbledore's expulsion hadn't fixed it, and the years since hadn't fixed it, and none of the accumulated wisdom of adult administration had found its way to this wall on this night. But Harry had. "I see it," he said quietly, to the castle, to the corridor, to whatever was listening in the stones. "I see it." The torches flared once, briefly, like a signal acknowledged. He turned around and started running. He had people to wake up. He had a plan to start building. He had a monster to find, and a diary to use as a lever, and somewhere in the deep subterranean dark of a school he was beginning to truly know, a chamber that had been sealed since 1943 was open and breathing. The castle knew. He knew. That was enough to start. Behind him, the cat hung frozen in the torchlight, and on the wall the letters gleamed wet and ancient and furious, and the school was quiet around them, 500 students sleeping, unaware. Harry ran faster. Chapter 4, The Writing on the Wall. Hermione was already awake when Harry knocked. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected to have to shake her shoulder, argue with a half-conscious person about the urgency of the situation. Instead, the door to the prefect room she'd commandeered as her own, adjacent to the headmaster's quarters, a room that had probably been a sitting room once, that now contained 3 overflowing bookshelves and a desk that looked like a paper explosion, swung open before his knuckles finished their second knock, and Hermione was standing there in her dressing gown with a quill behind her ear and ink on her left wrist, looking like someone interrupted mid-thought rather than mid-sleep. "I heard running," she said. "Mrs. Norris," Harry said. Petrified. Second-floor corridor, near the bathroom. Her eyes went sharp. The same one? Same corridor, yes. And there's writing on the wall. In both Parseltongue and English this time. He was already moving back toward the corridor, and she was already following him, pulling her dressing gown tighter against the castle's night chill. It says the Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware, Hermione said, quietly, like she was finishing a sentence she already knew. She'd clearly read further into the school's history than Harry had managed. You knew about the chamber. I knew about the legend. I didn't know, she stopped. I didn't know it was real. They arrived at the corridor. The cat was still there, hanging suspended and stiff, eyes fixed open on something only she'd seen. Hermione made a small sound that wasn't quite horror but was adjacent to it, and then she stepped forward and looked at the wall with the focused professional attention that she brought to everything that frightened her. Basilisk, she said, after 20 seconds. Harry stared at her. The petrification, she said, pointing at Mrs. Norris. Not a jinx, not a hex. This is petrification from indirect sight, she saw it in a reflection, or through something, and that saved her. Direct eye contact from a basilisk kills. She looked at him. It also explains the Parseltongue connection. A basilisk would respond to a Parselmouth. It would be controlled by one. Tom Riddle. Tom Riddle, she confirmed. Or whatever is left of him in that diary. They stood with that for a moment. Down the corridor, a suit of armor shifted its weight with a quiet metallic sound, and Harry had the sense of the castle listening, not anxiously, but with the particular attention of something that had been waiting for this understanding to arrive. Hermione, Harry said. How do you kill a basilisk? She looked at him with the expression of someone very intelligent confronting a very large problem they've already started solving. I need the library, she said. Go. I'll get Ron. Anne, he looked at Mrs. Norris. I need to get Filch before he finds her himself. Argus Filch found out via Harry, not by walking into the corridor at midnight and discovering his cat alone and frozen, which was something Harry had decided to prevent entirely on the basis that Filch deserved to hear it from a person and not a wall. He knocked on Filch's office door and waited, and when Filch opened it, gray-faced, nightshirt, already suspicious because it was midnight and a student was knocking, Harry said it plainly. Mrs. Norris has been petrified. She's alive. She's in the second-floor corridor and I want to take her to Madame Pomfrey now. I wanted to tell you first. Filch looked at him. Filch had a complicated relationship with the student population of Hogwarts that was almost entirely their fault, in Harry's assessment, decades of being resented and avoiding and used as a byword for authority as punishment, without anyone apparently noticing that under the resentment and the wheezing threats lived someone who genuinely loved this school and its one small creature with a devotion so total it had calcified into severity. He was a squib who had spent his life surrounded by magic he couldn't do, which had to be its own particular loneliness. Alive, Filch said. The word came out raw. Yes. Definitely alive. Madame Pomfrey will be able to confirm it, and the petrification can be reversed. I'm sure of it. Something in Filch's face went through several things fast and settled on a furious blankness that Harry recognized as the expression of a person holding themselves together through sheer will. What happened to her? I'm investigating, Harry said. I promise you I'm investigating. Filch looked at him for a long moment, not with the usual suspicion, not with contempt, but with the raw directness of someone who decided to believe something because the alternative was unbearable. All right, he said. Show me. By 2 a.m, Hermione had 11 books open on the library table. Mrs. Norris was in the hospital wing. Filch was sitting in a chair next to the bed watching her with the kind of silent vigil that no amount of curtained-off privacy could quite contain, and Ron had appeared in the library door with his hair pointing in 4 directions and the sharp-eyed alertness that meant he'd been awake for a while before Harry knocked. Heard voices, he said. Also I think the castle was doing something with the temperature again. It's warmer upstairs than it should be. It does that when something's wrong, Harry said, which he now said as a statement of fact, the way he might say the lake is cold or the moving staircases shift east on Thursdays. Ron sat down across from Hermione. Looked at the books. Looked at Harry. How bad? Basilisk, Harry said. Ron's face did a remarkable thing. It went through shock and landed on the specific expression that Ron Weasley wore when something was genuinely serious and he needed to be serious with it, no bravado, no deflection, just clear-eyed Ron, the one that appeared in moments when being a Weasley in a world full of large problems had given him a kind of scaled practicality. In the walls, he said. In the walls. Moving through the pipes, we think. Harry sat down. The Chamber of Secrets is somewhere below the school. The basilisk comes out from there. The connection is through the plumbing. How do we find the chamber? That's tonight's question, Hermione said, without looking up from the book she was reading. The historical record is incomplete. Dumbledore spent years looking for it. Didn't find it. Because he's not a Parselmouth, Harry said. Which means the entry point responds to Parseltongue, Hermione said, following the thread. Which means if you can find the entry point, I can open it. Harry leaned back. The castle's been showing me things. Corridors, doors, routes. I think it's trying to walk me toward it. Then let it, Ron said. When I'm ready, Harry said. Not before. I need to know what I'm going into before I go into it. Hermione looked up at that with an expression that was impossible to fully hide, a flash of genuine appreciation before she went back to the book. Basilisk weaknesses, she said, turning the book around so they could both see the page. Eyes, obviously, you can't look at it directly. A rooster's crow is lethal to it. And, she paused. And the venom in its fangs is one of very few substances capable of destroying a Horcrux. Silence. The diary, Ron said. The diary, Hermione confirmed. So whatever we use to deal with the basilisk, we have two targets. She met Harry's eyes. You already knew that. I suspected, he said. I didn't want to say it until we had confirmation. Why not? Because once I say it out loud, we have to plan for it. And planning to take a basilisk fang to Voldemort's diary requires a certain amount of, he searched for the word. Commitment. Ron said, we've committed to worse. Harry looked at him. Have we? Well. Ron considered. Not yet. But the summer's young. The first petrification victim that wasn't a cat came on Thursday. A first-year Ravenclaw named Colin Creevey, who'd been photographing everything in the castle with a second-hand camera since September 1st, was found near the top of the main staircase during morning rounds, frozen in place with his camera raised and his eyes fixed on something behind him that was no longer there. When Harry turned the camera over, the film inside was melted. He'd photographed the basilisk's reflection in his lens. It had been enough to petrify rather than kill. Harry sent the camera to the restricted section under lock and key, moved Colin to the hospital wing, pulled Gemma Farley and Ron into the corridor where it had happened, and stood in the specific spot where Colin had been standing and looked at what Colin would have been looking at. Around the corner. The corridor bent and there was a stretch of wall with a dark patch that was slightly more reflective than the stone around it, not a mirror, just a section where the polishing charms had been over-applied. You could see a faint reflection in it if you stood at the right angle. He came around that corner, Harry said quietly, and something was moving ahead of him. He raised the camera instinctively because that's what he does. He looked at the polished wall. He photographed the reflection without meaning to. The basilisk was in this corridor and went that way, he pointed toward the staircase that led to the second-floor east wing. Which means it went past that bathroom. Ron was already ahead of him. The same bathroom. The entrance is there, Harry said. Somewhere near that bathroom. The castle keeps directing me to that corridor, Harry, Gemma said sharply. He turned. She was looking at the floor. A trail of water, faint but there, tracking from the direction of the bathroom and continuing down the corridor in the opposite direction from where they were looking. The trail was fresh. It went both ways, Harry said. Two paths through the building from the same point. He crouched and looked at the water trail. Something cold and clear was moving through him, not fear, exactly. Something cleaner. The recognition of a problem with specific edges, which was always less frightening than a formless one. Hermione needs to know this. And I need to get into that bathroom. It's a girl's bathroom, Ron said. Harry looked at him. Just noting it, Ron said. For the record. Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, in the full light of a Thursday morning, was exactly as miserable as its reputation. The plumbing moaned, there was a persistent damp in the ceiling that had been dripping for what looked like decades, and Myrtle herself was in the last stall making the kind of sounds that managed to be simultaneously theatrical and genuinely sad. Harry had learned, in the previous days, that the ghosts of Hogwarts responded best to being treated as people rather than atmospheric features. He stood at the bathroom door and said, "Myrtle. A whale. Go away. I'd like to talk to you about the plumbing," Harry said. The wailing stopped. A long pause. Then a translucent girl emerged from the last stall, hovering at shoulder height, with enormous ghostly spectacles and the permanently aggrieved air of someone who died badly and never quite recovered. She looked at Harry. Then, unexpectedly, she giggled. "You're the headmaster," she said. "I am. That's funny." She drifted closer, nose first, studying him with the unself-conscious directness of someone who didn't have social consequences anymore. "You don't look like a headmaster." "I know." He looked at the sinks, the pipes, the general architecture of the plumbing fixtures. "Myrtle, how long have you been in this bathroom?" "Since 1943, she said. "When I died." The capital letter was audible. "Were you here when the chamber was first opened?" The change in her was immediate and total. The theatrical misery drained away and left something real and specific and not quite frightened, the look of a ghost who had been carrying something for 50 years and hadn't found anyone to give it to. "I saw the eyes," she said, very quietly. "I heard something in the pipes. I came out of my stall to look, and I saw the eyes, and then," she gestured vaguely at her own transparent state. "The sink," Harry said. "Which one?" She drifted to the far left sink. The one with the slightly different fixture, the one that Harry now noticed had a small snake carved into the side of the tap, barely visible under decades of limescale, in exactly the same style as the crest on the letter he'd received in July. He crouched and looked at it. "Thank you," he said to Myrtle. She stared at him. "Nobody ever says thank you to me." "Well." He looked at her. "That's a significant oversight by everyone who's used this bathroom for 50 years. Myrtle blinked. And then, slowly, she smiled, the first genuine non-theatrical expression he'd seen from her, something that transformed her face briefly into the face of the girl she'd been before she'd been a ghost. Then it went back to its customary aggrievement, but gently, like a door closing on something preserved rather than hidden. "The sink opens downward," she said. "It goes deep." "How deep?" "I don't know." "I never," she paused. "I never went in." Harry nodded. He stood up. "I'll need you to leave the bathroom for a while," he said, "when the time comes." "Will you come back and tell me what it's like?" she asked. "In the chamber?" "Yes," he said. "I promise." That afternoon's defense class was the largest yet. He'd opened it to anyone who wanted to come, 5th through 7th years, no year restriction, and the classroom held 62 students when he walked in, which was 20 more than the room technically fit, with students sitting on tables and windowsills and one particularly determined 5th year sitting on the floor with his wand in his lap. Harry looked at the room. The room looked back. "Right," he said. "We're going to talk about the Patronus charm." A murmur moved through the room. Someone at the back said, "That's an EWT level." Someone else said, "He's 12. There was a brief argument about which of these facts was more relevant. "It's a third-year charm in theory," Harry said. "It's difficult because it requires something specific that most teaching misses. You can't do it through willpower alone. You need a memory. Not a nice memory. Not just a happy one. He picked up his wand. Something that made you feel that the world was real and worth being in. The difference between those two things is what the charm runs on. He cast it. The stag burst from his wand silver and bright and filled the classroom with cold clean light, and for a moment every person in the room went completely still, not startled, but caught, the way you were caught by something genuinely beautiful before your brain caught up with it. The stag moved through the room. Several students reached toward it instinctively, the way children reached toward fire. It dissolved after 15 seconds, the light fading back to the ordinary afternoon gray. The memory I used, Harry said, into the silence, is from when I found out I was a wizard. That the world was bigger than I knew it was. That I belonged somewhere. He put his wand down. Everyone has a version of that. Find yours. We'll work on this every week. Nobody left at the end of class. He had to specifically dismiss them. Walking back to the office afterward, Neville fell into step beside him. Neville, who had been quietly and consistently present across the last 4 days, helping in the greenhouses in the mornings, managing the first years in flying class without any instructions beyond Harry asking, sitting in defense classes with the careful attention of someone determined to absorb everything. Harry, he said. Neville. I want to help. With whatever the thing in the walls is. Harry glanced at him. Neville was looking forward, not at Harry, with the expression of someone who'd committed to saying something and wasn't going to be deflected. His wand was straight in his hand, an old habit from classes where he'd been told he held it wrong, and he was gripping it the way a person held a tool they'd finally decided belonged to them. I know you can handle it, Neville said. I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying I want to be there. I want to do something that matters. Harry thought about the basilisk in the pipes. He thought about Tom Riddle's diary on his desk. He thought about the chamber entrance in the girls' bathroom, deep and dark and waiting. There's a rooster, he said. In the Hogwarts grounds. Hagrid used to keep them. I know where, Neville said immediately. Near the pumpkin patch. I need it protected. Harry looked at him. Something is going to try to kill all the roosters on the grounds before I can get to the chamber. I need someone watching them. Neville was already nodding. How long? 3 days. Maybe 4. Right. Neville moved his wand to his other hand and back, a small adjustment. I'll sort it. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment. Neville, Harry said. You know what you're doing, right? You've always known. You just needed someone to stop telling you otherwise. Neville looked at him sideways. Not overcome, just considering. Yeah, he said, after a moment. I think I'm starting to work that out. The owl from Lucius Malfoy arrived on Friday evening. Not a ministry owl, a private one, sleek and silver gray, with a handsome aristocratic air that managed to communicate wealth and expectation simultaneously. It landed on the headmaster's desk with a precision that felt designed to intimidate and dropped a letter sealed with the Malfoy crest. Harry opened it. Dear Mr. Potter, I have become aware of certain developments at Hogwarts School that concern me deeply as a school governor and as a parent. I am writing to advise you that the Board of Governors will be convening a special session on Monday to discuss the current governance situation, at which point they will be voting on whether to invoke their authority under the Governor's Charter to formally contest the current appointment. I would additionally draw your attention to the fact that several items of school property may have been moved or accessed without appropriate authorization during the current disruption. It would be in everyone's interest for such items to be returned to their rightful locations before Monday. I trust you understand the gravity of the situation. Lucius Malfoy School Governor Harry put the letter down. He read it again. He looked at the phrase items of school property. He looked at rightful locations. He thought about the cloth-wrapped diary sitting in the locked desk drawer where he'd moved it 2 days ago. He thought about Ginny Weasley, who was eating at every meal now, and who had started talking in class again, and who had come to the office yesterday on her own and sat down across from him and said, plainly and with the directness of someone who decided to be brave about something. "I want to understand what happened to me." And he'd explained, as carefully and clearly as he could, about the diary and what it was and how it worked, and she'd been quiet for a long time and then she'd said, "I knew something was wrong and I couldn't make it stop," and he'd said, "I know. That's not your fault," and they'd sat with that for a while. He picked up his quill and wrote his response to Lucius Malfoy. It was one paragraph. It took him 4 minutes. "Mr. Malfoy, thank you for your letter. I am aware of the governor's charter and I look forward to the Monday session. Regarding items of school property, everything that belongs to Hogwarts is currently at Hogwarts, properly stored and documented. If you have a specific item in mind, I'd be happy to discuss it at the Monday meeting, in front of the full board, with a full accounting of its provenance and its current condition and the circumstances by which a student came to possess it earlier this term. Until Monday. H. J. Potter, Headmaster." He sealed it and sent it back with Malfoy's own owl, which seemed briefly outraged at being asked to make a return journey and then departed with the stiff dignity of a creature that had standards. "Bold," said Dilys, from her portrait. "It's the truth," Harry said. "Sometimes those are the same thing." He leaned back in the chair. Through the window, the grounds were going gold with late afternoon, the lake flat and still, the mountains purple against a clear sky. He'd been headmaster for 5 days. In that time he'd dealt with a ministry inspection, a Draco Malfoy coup attempt, a Snape standoff, a Dumbledore consultation, a petrified cat, a petrified student, 2 messages in Parseltongue, the identification of a basilisk, the location of the chamber entrance, and now a school governor threatening him from a letter. He was not, he noticed, afraid. Tired, yes. Thinking constantly, yes. Behind on sleep in a way that he was beginning to feel in the back of his eyes. But not afraid. The fear had been the Dursleys, and the cupboard, and not knowing what he was or whether any of it was real. This, the problems in front of him, clear-edged and serious as they were, this was the opposite of that. This was knowable. This was workable. He heard voices in the corridor outside, 2 students arguing amiably about something related to transfiguration theory, their footsteps easy and unhurried. Heard, from somewhere below, the clatter of the great hall preparing for dinner. Heard the castle's ordinary music, which he'd been learning to hear the way you learn to hear a particular accent, the creak of old timber, the rush of water in pipes, the distant movement of the staircases repositioning for evening traffic. There was a knock at the door. "Come in." It was Ron and Hermione together, which usually meant they'd been talking on the way up and had made a decision. Ron was carrying a rolled parchment and Hermione was carrying 2 books and wearing the expression she wore when she'd found something she was 90% sure about and wanted to be 100. "Sit down," Harry said. "Tell me." "Phoenixes," Hermione said, setting her books on the desk. "I've been looking at what kills basilisks, really kills them, not just petrifies or repels. There's very limited information because basilisks are class XXXXX beasts and encounters with them are almost always fatal, so the literature on actually surviving them is." She stopped herself. "The point is, a phoenix's song blinds a basilisk. Not permanently, but it disorients it completely. And phoenix tears heal basilisk venom. Which would matter if you were going into the chamber," Ron said, "and planning to get close enough to use Fong on diary." Harry looked at the empty perch in the corner of the office. Where Fawkes had stood before the expulsions. "Fawkes went with Dumbledore," he said. "Yes," Hermione said. But, she opened the first book to a page with an illustration, an old woodcut of a phoenix in flight, and beneath it a passage of dense text, and in the margin of this particular copy, which was old enough that its binding was mostly memory, someone had written in small faded ink, "Hogwarts has always had one." "Whose book is this?" Harry asked. It was in the restricted section. In the architectural history section, not the creatures section, which is why it's never been. She pointed to the inscription inside the front cover. "Property of Rowena Ravenclaw. The castle had a phoenix before Dumbledore had Fawkes." Rowena Ravenclaw's notes suggest it was bonded to the building itself rather than to any individual headmaster. Silence. Ron said, so there might be a phoenix somewhere in this school that none of us know about. Or, Hermione said, that the castle knows about. They both looked at Harry. Harry thought about the warmth in the walls. The torches brightening. The gates opening. The way the castle walked him toward things it needed him to see. I'll ask, he said. You'll ask the castle? Yes. Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. Looked at the ceiling briefly. You know, he said, a year ago I would have said that was insane. Now it just seems reasonable. Hermione offered. I was going to say, various, Ron said. But sure. Harry smiled, the real kind, not the managed kind he'd been deploying through ministry tours and Draco confrontations. The kind that came out when he wasn't thinking about it. The Monday meeting, he said. Lucius Malfoy and the Board of Governors. I need everything we have on the diary documented and evidence before then. He looked at Hermione. Can you write it up? Everything we know, with sources. Already started, she said. And I need to be in the chamber before Monday, he said. Before whatever Malfoy is planning catalyzes and before the diary connection does anything else to someone. He looked at Ron. You and Neville are with me. Ron said, obviously. I need Ginny too, Harry said. She knows Riddle's voice better than anyone. If the diary does something, responds to something, she'll recognize it. Hermione said, Harry, I'm not going to put her in danger, he said. She stays at the entrance. She doesn't come down. But I need her there. He paused. She asked to help. She wants to do something. I'm not going to take that away from her. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, all right. Right then. Harry stood up. Dinner. Then I want to try something tonight. Something? Ron asked. Harry looked at the empty perch in the corner. I'm going to ask the castle about its phoenix. He did it alone, after dinner, in the headmaster's office with the fire low and the portrait sleeping and the window cracked for the smell of the evening air off the lake. He didn't make a ritual of it. He just sat on the hearthrug, not in the chair, not at the desk, just on the floor in front of the fire, which felt right in a way he couldn't have explained, and he spoke to the room. I know you've been here longer than anyone alive remembers, he said. I know you've watched a lot of people try to manage what's in your walls. I know you chose me for a reason. He looked at the fire. I'm asking you to help me. Not carry me, I'm going into the chamber. I'll handle what's there. But I need the tools to do it right, and I think you have one of those tools, and I think you've been waiting for someone to ask. Silence. The fire. The old stone. The sleeping portraits. Then, from somewhere inside the wall to the left of the fireplace, not a sound, but a warmth, a specific point of warmth that moved, that traveled along the wall from left to right and stopped at a section of stone that looked identical to the sections around it. Harry got up. He walked to that section of wall. He put his hand against it. The stone was very warm. He pressed, and a section of the wall, no door frame, no visible seam, just a seamless shift in a building's architecture, swung inward, and behind it was a small alcove he'd never seen before, and in the alcove, on a natural shelf of stone, sat a nest. Not a large nest. Ancient, clearly, the materials composing it were things that no longer existed in recognizable form, compressed by centuries into something almost like stone themselves. And rising from the center of the nest, in the particular golden orange that firelight could approximate but never quite match, a bird. Not full-grown. Small, the size of a large pigeon, awkward-looking in the way of creatures between stages. Its feathers were coming in patchy and brilliant, and its eyes when it looked at Harry were black and bright and old in a way that had nothing to do with the small body they occupied. It looked at him with those ancient eyes. Then it made a sound, not the full song, just a few notes, tentative and questioning, like someone clearing their throat before speaking. Harry crouched in front of the alcove and looked at the bird, and the bird looked at him, and he thought about Dumbledore's fox, the way the phoenix had always seemed to be paying attention to something just beyond what was happening in the room, something longer and less urgent than human timescales. "Hi," he said. The bird ruffled, settled, and made the sound again. A little more assured this time. A little more like a beginning. "I'm Harry," he said. "I know you probably already know that." The phoenix, and it was a phoenix, it was absolutely a phoenix, the heat coming off it was unlike anything biological, tilted its head and regarded him with eyes that held no judgment and complete attention. "I'm going to need your help," Harry said. "In a few days. Something underground. Something old and dark." He paused. "I'm not going to pretend it isn't dangerous. I'm not going to tell you it'll be fine. I need someone with me who isn't frightened of the dark." The phoenix stepped out of the nest. Stepped carefully, on legs that were still slightly uncertain in the way of young things, across the shelf of stone to its edge. Stepped from there, without hesitation, onto Harry's shoulder. The weight of it was almost nothing. The warmth of it was extraordinary. Harry sat very still. The bird settled, tucked its head briefly against his jaw with the matter-of-fact affection of something that had decided, and then lifted it again and looked out at the office with the alert, forward-focused attention of something that was ready. "Okay," Harry said, softly. From the portraits, one by one, the painted headmasters opened their eyes in the dark. And in the corner, by the fire, Dilly's Derwent said nothing. But she was smiling. Outside, the castle breathed around them, old and willing and vast, and the night settled over the mountains, and in the hospital wing a cat breathed in and breathed out, and in the walls the basilisk moved through the dark, patient, waiting, not yet knowing that the thing it was waiting for had just landed on a 12-year-old's shoulder and decided to stay. Sunday. Harry thought. Sunday night, after Neville had confirmed the roosters were safe, after Hermione had finished her documentation, after Ginny had been briefed and the entrance mapped and the plan made as solid as a plan made by 3 second-years and a young phoenix could be made. Sunday night. The chamber. He sat by the fire with the phoenix on his shoulder and planned it all the way through to the end, and he was still planning when the fire burned low and the castle settled into its deep night quiet, and when he finally stood and the bird shifted and resettled, ready to move, Harry felt, in the specific way of things that were true whether or not you were ready for them, that everything that had happened since September 1st had been pointing exactly here. He rolled up the last of his notes. He went to bed. He slept deeply and without dreams. The phoenix nested in Rowena Ravenclaw's old alcove with the wall open a crack and warm light spilling into the office, and the castle held the night around them like something that had been holding its breath for 50 years and had finally decided, after all this time, that it could let go. Chapter 5. The chamber. Sunday came in cold and clear. Harry spent the morning doing ordinary things with the deliberate focus of someone who knows the afternoon will be extraordinary and wants to stay grounded until then. He ate breakfast in the great hall with everyone else, talked to Gemma about the Monday governor's meeting, reviewed the week's class notes that Hermione had compiled into a single organized document, and spent 40 minutes in the greenhouse with Hannah Macmillan learning more than he'd expected about the medicinal properties of Dittany, which turned out to be relevant to more situations than he'd realized. He didn't tell anyone outside the core group what was happening tonight. Not because he wanted to keep secrets but because the school had a specific rhythm now, a functional daily pulse that he'd spent a week building, and he wasn't going to crack it with anxiety before he needed to. At noon he found Neville near the pumpkin patch. 3 roosters were pecking around the base of the largest pumpkin with the unconcerned energy of birds who had no idea they were the most strategically important creatures on the grounds. Neville was sitting on an upturned crate nearby, wand in hand, with the comfortable watchful patience of someone who'd been there for hours and was fine with that. "All 3?" Harry asked. "All 3. Nothing's come near them." Neville glanced up. "I put a ward on the perimeter last night. Not complicated, just an alert charm. It'll wake me if anything crosses it." Harry looked at the roosters. Then at Neville. You slept out here. On and off. Neville shrugged. The crate's not that bad. And Frank and Alice, he nodded at two of the roosters with the familiarity of someone who'd named them sometime in the last 3 days. They're good company. Harry sat down on the pumpkin. You named them. The third one's Trevor. Obviously. Harry laughed, an actual laugh, sudden and brief, and it felt like releasing something that had been compressed since Thursday. Neville smiled in the sideways way he had when he'd said something funny and wasn't sure it had landed. Tonight, Harry said. Neville nodded. I'll be at the bathroom by 8. You don't have to, I know, Neville said. I want to. He looked at Frank and Alice and Trevor pecking through the dirt. Gran always said the Longbottoms were never afraid of dark places. She said it like it was something to be proud of. He turned the wand over in his fingers. I think she meant it as a warning, actually. But I'd rather take it the other way. Harry looked at him for a moment. The other way's better, he said. He briefed Ginny at 2 o'clock, in the office, with Ron present because she was Ron's sister and Harry wasn't going to manage that conversation alone regardless of how well he thought he could handle it. He sat across from her and told her the plan clearly and completely, without softening or dramatizing, the way he'd have wanted someone to tell him. She listened without interrupting. When he finished she was quiet for a moment, hands in her lap, and Harry watched her process it, saw the fear move through her face and then move past it, the way weather moved across the castle grounds, present and then gone. The diary is what's been talking to me, she said. The thing in the chamber is connected to it. Through the same soul fragment, Harry confirmed. And when you destroy the diary, it severs the connection. Whatever Riddle put into it stops existing. She looked at her hands. Will I feel it? When it goes? I don't know, Harry said honestly. She nodded. Absorb that. You said I stay at the entrance. Top of the pipe. You don't come down. But I'm there. You're there, he said. If something goes wrong, if I call for you, if anything changes, you get Ron and you get out and you send the Phoenix to Dumbledore at the Hog's Head. The bird knows the way. Ginny looked at the alcove in the wall, where the Phoenix was currently regarding all of them with calm, interested attention. The bird had taken to watching the office's activity with the engaged observation of someone attending a show they'd been waiting for. What's its name? Ginny asked. I haven't given it one yet. You should, she said. Before tonight. Harry looked at the Phoenix. The Phoenix looked back. Care, he said, which wasn't a word he'd planned to say, it came from somewhere he didn't examine, from the part of himself that knew things before he'd thought them through. Old Welsh for fortress. Dilly's had said it once in a different context and it had settled somewhere in the back of his head. The Phoenix made a single clear sound, short and bright, like a bell struck once. Ginny smiled. It was a small smile, still careful, but it reached her eyes. Good, she said. They assembled at the bathroom at 8. Harry, Ron, Neville, and Ginny. Care on Harry's shoulder, warm and still. The bathroom door open, the room lit by their wands, Myrtle hovering near her stall and watching with enormous translucent eyes. You're really going in, Myrtle said. We're really going in, Harry said. Nobody ever goes in. She paused. Will you remember to come back and tell me? I promised, he said. I keep my promises. She looked at him for a long moment with those round ghostly eyes, and then she drifted backward into her stall and left them to it. Harry crouched in front of the sink with the small carved snake on the tap. Close up, you could see it was detailed beyond what anyone would bother putting on a plumbing fixture, scales individually incised, the head turned slightly as though mid-motion. He put 2 fingers on it and opened his mouth. The sound that came out wasn't English. It was that other thing, the sliding liquid sound that came from somewhere adjacent to his normal voice, and even after 2 instances of knowing he could do this, the sensation of it was strange, like finding a gear in yourself you'd never used but which the mechanism had always had. He said, "Open." The sinks moved. Not with the grinding drama of a horror story, they shifted aside smoothly, counterweighting themselves with the ease of something that had been designed to be opened and simply hadn't been opened recently. A pipe wide enough to climb into, stone smooth on the inside, angling steeply downward into dark. Ron looked at it. "Right. That's a pipe." "That's a pipe," Harry agreed. "We're going down a pipe." "Yes." "Fine." Ron looked at Harry. "You first, obviously." Harry looked at Ginny. She was standing straight, both hands at her sides, and she looked at him with the steady directness she'd had in the office when she'd said, "I want to understand what happened to me." She wasn't going to fall apart. She wasn't going to need managing. She was going to stand at the top of this pipe and she was going to hold the line up here, and she was going to be fine. "We'll be back before midnight," Harry said. "I know," she said. "Go." He went in feet first and dropped. The pipe was longer than he'd expected and faster, not a fall exactly, more like a slide, angled and smooth, depositing him at the bottom in a crouch on damp stone. He straightened and cast lumos and had 3 seconds of looking around before Ron arrived behind him with a muffled yell, and then Neville, more composed, landing in a ready stance that Harry suspected had been practiced. The tunnel was vast. Ancient. Stone arched above them and stretched ahead into dark, and along the walls at intervals were carved serpents that had probably terrified everyone who'd found this place before, but Harry looked at them and felt only the recognition of pattern, the same style as the tap, the same as the letter seal, Salazar Slytherin's signature across everything he'd built. Care was on his shoulder, unruffled, faintly luminous in the dark. The warmth was useful down here where the cold of deep stone pressed in from all sides. "Stay close," Harry said. "Don't run ahead. If I stop, you stop." They moved. The tunnel opened and narrowed and opened again, the architecture deliberately difficult, Slytherin building in the same way his portrait suggested he'd thought, which was in layers, each one less penetrable for the unprepared. Twice Harry stopped because Care tensed on his shoulder, and twice they waited while something in the dark ahead shifted and then stilled, whatever it was moving away from the phoenix's heat rather than toward them. The basilisk knew they were here. Harry felt it the way he'd felt the castle's presence, not as sound or sight but as a quality in the air, something old and enormous breathing in the dark ahead. "Harry," Neville said quietly. "I know." He didn't slow down. "It knows we're coming." "Yes." He kept walking. "That's fine." Ron made a sound that communicated he didn't find this fine, but he kept moving too. The second door was the one that stopped them. Sealed with a full encirclement of stone serpents, intertwined so densely that the door itself was almost invisible beneath them. Harry spoke to it without hesitating, "Open, let me through, I'm here," and felt the parseltongue leave him like an exhaled breath, and the serpents moved, uncoiling from each other, and the door sighed open on a chamber beyond that was simply enormous. Pillars stretched from floor to ceiling, carved with serpents the whole length of them, and at the far end, across 50 meters of damp stone floor, through the pillars, in the pale green light that came from somewhere undefinable, a statue. Salazar Slytherin. Old stone face, bearded, enormous, mouth open in the way of something that had been built to serve a purpose. And on the floor, at the base of the statue, Tom Riddle's diary lay open. Harry's hand went to his pocket before the rest of him had caught up. The diary was supposed to be locked in his desk upstairs. He reached in and his fingers closed on cloth, and when he pulled it out, it was light. Empty. Just cloth. Something had moved the diary. Something had gotten into the headmaster's office and taken it and brought it here. He had a single second to process this before a voice said, from somewhere between the pillars, "I wondered how long it would take you to find this place." Tom Riddle stepped out from behind the second pillar on the left. He was 16, or the memory of 16, the shape Riddle wore inside the diary, tall and dark-haired and handsome in the specific way of someone who'd constructed their appearance as deliberately as their arguments. He was more solid than Harry had expected, more present, the diary on the floor was open and its pages were moving, a faint light rising from them, and the more the pages turned, the more solid Riddle looked. He was feeding on someone. Harry looked at the base of the statue and felt his blood go cold. Ginny Weasley was lying at the foot of the statue. She was pale and still and she was breathing, he could see that from here, the faint rise and fall, but her eyes were closed and her hands were flat against the stone and she had the particular quality of someone whose consciousness was somewhere else. She hadn't stayed at the entrance. She followed you on her own, Riddle said, following Harry's gaze with the slight smile of someone enjoying the complications they'd created. I didn't even have to call her. She came because she loves you, in the way that young girls love heroes. The smile didn't waver. It's rather useful. Harry looked at Riddle. Then he stopped thinking about what he felt about Ginny being on the floor and started thinking about what he was going to do. Give her back, he said. She was never mine to give, Riddle said. She gave herself. He moved between the pillars with the easy grace of someone who'd owned this space for 50 years of absence and was now inhabiting it like a returned landlord. I've been curious about you, Harry Potter. You are unexpected. You thought Dumbledore would be leading whatever came down here. I thought an adult would, Riddle said. Someone who understood what they were facing. Someone who'd have the appropriate fear. He tilted his head. You're not afraid. I know what you are, Harry said. A piece of a soul in a book. You're not Voldemort. You're not even close to Voldemort. You're a memory of who he used to be, and he spent 50 years becoming something much worse than this. He kept walking forward, slowly, steady-paced, and he watched Riddle's face as he said it, watched the smile go fractionally less certain. You think you're frightening because you're in a place with a monster and a dead girl on the floor, but Ginny isn't dead and the monster doesn't know yet that I have a phoenix. Kaya chose that moment to spread her wings on Harry's shoulder. Not aggressively, just a full extension, the wingspan considerably larger than the bird's body suggested it should be, the light coming off the feathers gold and warm and wrong, in the best possible way, for a chamber designed around cold. Riddle looked at the phoenix. For the first time, something real crossed his face. Not fear. Tom Riddle at 16 was already the thing that had decided long ago not to feel fear, but recognition. The recognition of a variable he hadn't planned for. That bird, he said carefully, is bonded to the castle. Yes, Harry said. How did you? The castle trusts me, Harry said. Which it didn't trust you. Which is, I think, why you're in a diary and I'm standing here. He was 20 feet from the base of the statue now. From Ginny. From the diary. Riddle's expression settled back into the smoothed-over composure he wore as a default, but it was deliberate now in a way it hadn't been when Harry walked in. He was managing. He was recalculating. The basilisk, Riddle said, and looked up at the statue. At the open mouth. Speak to me, Slytherin, Harry said, first. He said it in Parseltongue, the way he'd said everything else down here, but he said it louder and more deliberately, not to the room but upward, to the statue, to the pipe dark of the open mouth, and what he felt move through the Parseltongue was less like a command and more like an introduction. I'm here. I'm one of you. Come out and let's finish this. The basilisk came. It came from the statue's mouth and it was enormous, 20 feet of yellow-scaled body, more enormous than anything Harry had read or imagined, filling the chamber with a sound like stone on stone as it moved. Its eyes were closed. Not because it was docile, because Kaya had already begun to sing. The song was nothing like Harry had imagined a phoenix song would be. He'd imagined something beautiful and transcendent, the kind of thing that stopped you in your tracks. What Kaya sang was more useful than that, it was targeted, specific, a sound that hit the basilisk like a physical thing, and the basilisk coiled in on itself with a sound that was somewhere between a hiss and a scream, its closed eyes locked shut, its body moving in the involuntary way of something in pain rather than controlled motion. It was disoriented. Thrashing. Not contained, 20 feet of basilisk was never contained, but confused enough that it wasn't pointing those eyes at anything. Harry had about 30 seconds. He ran. Not at the basilisk, toward the diary. He hit his knees on the stone 10 feet from Ginny and the diary, sliding the last distance, and grabbed the diary and looked up at the basilisk, still coiling, still reacting to Care's song, its body between Harry and the escape route, and thought, I need a fong. The basilisk thrashed. A section of its body, heavy as a fallen tree, hit the floor 6 feet from Harry with a crack that shook the stone under him. Ron was yelling something from behind the pillars. Neville was yelling something different. Both sounds were background noise. Harry was watching the basilisk's head. Watching its body as it moved. And the head swung toward him, eyes still shut, thank God, still responding to the song, and came down, and Harry didn't move. He waited. The basilisk's head came down and the open mouth skimmed the floor and one fong, one enormous, curved, venom-yellow fong, scraped across the stone and Harry caught it. His hand closed around it and it punched through his palm and he didn't register the pain because the pain was distant and not the point, and he pulled it free from the basilisk's jaw with the flat-footed determination of someone who has decided to do a thing regardless of what the thing costs. The fong came free. The basilisk recoiled, head whipping sideways, and that swing caught Harry across the shoulder and launched him 6 feet through the air. He hit a pillar and hit the floor and held onto the fong with both hands despite the impact. He looked at his right hand. The puncture wound was deep and the venom was already moving, he could feel it, a burning cold spreading from the palm up toward the wrist, the particular wrongness of something that attacked at the cellular level. Right. He was going to need to be fast. He pushed himself upright. 3 steps to the diary. He opened it on the floor, blank pages, Riddle's handwriting gone, the light from it pulsing with the particular desperation of something aware of what was coming, and he drove the fong through the cover. The effect was not subtle. Ink exploded from the diary, not ordinary ink, not even the thick dark ink of enchanted objects, but something that screamed, which was the only word for the sound it made, a sound that was somehow both very loud and coming from the inside of Harry's head. And the light that had been building in Riddle's form stuttered like a candle in wind and the diary shook and Harry leaned on the fong and pushed it through to the desk of the stone floor and held it there. The scream stopped. The diary went still. The light that had been Tom Riddle's memory flickered, surged once, the way fire surged before it went out, and Riddle's form, half solid and bright with borrowed life, turned its face toward Harry with the last thing it had instead of an expression, which was something like fury and something like recognition and something underneath both of those that was, Harry thought, just the faintest shadow of fear. Then it was gone. The diary was a destroyed book on the floor. Its pages were ordinary and wet and finished. In the sudden silence, Ginny Weasley took a sharp breath. Harry crossed the floor to her in 4 steps, dropped to his knees, and put his good hand on her shoulder. Ginny. Ginny, look at me. Her eyes opened. Red-rimmed, unfocused, the specific blur of someone surfacing from a long depth. She blinked once, twice, and then she looked at Harry and her face did what faces did when something terrible that had been pressing on them was suddenly, completely gone. Is it? She started. It's over, he said. It's done. She sat up and he helped her and she looked around the chamber, at the fallen book, at the basilisk, which was still now, disoriented in the corner of the chamber, Care's song holding it in a kind of suspended bewilderment, and she breathed in once, hard, with her whole chest. I followed you, she said. I know you told me not to. I couldn't, it's all right, Harry said. It's not, I could have, Ginny. He looked at her directly. I would have done the same thing. Now let's get you up. She took his offered hand to stand and he didn't let her see the one that was wrong. But she saw his face. You're hurt, she said. I'm working on it. Harry, she looked at his hand, which was a mistake, because it was fairly dramatic. Harry, that's Care, he said. The phoenix pulled back from the song. The basilisk, disoriented and blind in the way that Care's song left them, not dead, but beaten, in the deep animal sense of having been outmatched, turned toward the statue and began, slowly, to retreat back into the pipe from which it had come. It would go back to its chamber. It was alone and old and directionless without its master's voice, and Harry thought about that for a half-second, about a creature that had been weaponized for a purpose and which, without that purpose, was simply an animal in a hole, and made a note to think about it more carefully later, when his hand wasn't killing him. Care left his shoulder and landed on his arm, just above the wrist of the damaged hand, and bent her head to the wound, and the tears that fell from her eyes onto it were not a dramatic thing. They were quiet and immediate and precise, the way the best healing always was. The burning cold receded. The puncture began to close. Ron came out from behind the pillar he'd been sheltering behind, not the far one, Harry noted, he'd been at the nearest one, closest to the action, wand in hand, and aimed at the basilisk's body the entire time. Neville came from the other side. He had a look on his face that Harry would think about later, not the look of someone who'd survived something, but the look of someone who'd been there for something, which was different. More permanent. The basilisk, Ron said, watching it retreat. It's going back, Harry said. It's done. Are we just leaving it in there? For now. Harry looked at where it had gone. It's old. It's been down here a long time. It needs someone to direct it, and that someone is gone. He stood fully upright, Care back on his shoulder, his hand still healing but functional now. I'll figure out what to do with it. You'll figure out what to do with the basilisk, Neville said. Right. Do you have a better idea? No, Neville said immediately. I just like saying the sentence out loud. Harry looked at the destroyed diary on the floor. He bent and picked it up, and it was just a book now, wet and ruined and absolutely, definitively finished, no warmth in it, no pull, no sense of anything present. Just paper. He put it in his pocket. He looked at Ginny. She was standing straight and she was pale, but she was present, fully present, in a way he realized she hadn't been since September 1st, a quality of full occupation in her own face that the diary had been gradually emptying out. Can you walk? He asked. Obviously, she said, with a flash of something that was almost her usual self, the self he'd seen briefly in moments across the last week. Stop asking me if I'm alright every 5 seconds. I'm going to keep asking. I'm going to keep finding it annoying. That's fine, he said. Means you're yourself. She looked at him. Something complicated passed over her face and she looked away. Let's go, she said. Getting out was faster than going in, because Care, it turned out, could transport them. Harry hadn't known this. The phoenix simply spread her wings in the chamber, full span, and in that enclosed space the wingspan was larger than it had been in the office, because the bird was different in here, more itself, the size of itself rather than the size it occupied in ordinary rooms, and the light that came off her was warm and immediate and total, and when Harry put his hand on her back and sat up, they were in the bathroom. Not the pipe. The bathroom. Just, in it. Myrtle screamed. Then she recognized Harry and screamed again, but in a different register. You're back, she said. I'm back, Harry said. You're covered in, she gestured vaguely at the general state of all four of them, which was, damp, stone-dusted, basilisk-adjacent in various ways. Myrtle, Harry said, it's over. The chamber is sealed. What happened to you in 1943, you don't have to worry about it anymore. She stared at him. The theatrical misery that was her permanent expression did something complicated. Her face moved through several things at speed, and none of them were the weeping Harry had expected. Really? She said, in a small voice. Really? She was quiet for a moment. Then, with great dignity, she drifted back into her stall and the door swung shut and there was silence from behind it, which was the ghost equivalent of needing a moment. Harry looked at his core group standing in the bathroom, Ron, windswept and grim and present, Neville, steady, Ginny, pale and returned to herself. Hospital wing, he said. All of us. Madame Pomfrey is going to have opinions. Madame Pomfrey always has opinions, Ron said. Tonight she gets to have all of them. He let her talk. She'd earned it. When she got to Ginny, who was the last one she examined, because Ginny had held up through the chamber and the bathroom and the walk to the hospital wing with the compressed composure of someone saving the falling apart for a safe place, Pomfrey's voice went quiet and professional and kind, and she drew the curtain around Ginny's bed and stayed for a long time. Harry sat on his own bed with the destroyed diary in his hands. Ron was in the next bed eating from a packet of chocolate frogs that had appeared from somewhere in his robes. Neville was sitting on the edge of his, wand still in hand, doing the periodic checking over of oneself for damage that people did after things they hadn't been sure they'd walk away from. Harry, Ron said, through a mouthful of frog. Yeah. That was, he stopped. Looked at the frog card in his hand, Dumbledore, as it happened, which under the circumstances had a quality of comedy. I don't actually have a word for what that was. Neither do I, Harry said. Is it always going to be like this? Harry thought about it. I don't know. Maybe. Ron considered this for a moment. All right, he said, and ate the frog. Harry held the diary for another minute, and then he put it on the bedside table and lay down and looked at the ceiling of the hospital wing and listened to the castle settle around him, the distant pipes, the old wood, the particular breath of a building that had been holding something bad inside it for 50 years and had just, finally, let it go. Malfoy, Neville said quietly, from his bed. What about him? He knew about the diary, Neville said. You think he knew what it was? His father knew, Harry said. Draco might not have known everything. But he knew enough to feel guilty about it. He thought about Draco standing in the office on Thursday, unable to finish the sentence about where the dark object had come from. I think he knew Ginny was wrong. And I think he'd been knowing it for a while and not knowing what to do about it. That's not the same as being innocent, Neville said. No, Harry agreed. It's not. Through the curtain, he heard Madame Pomfrey say something to Ginny in a voice too low to hear, and heard Ginny's response, still too low, but with a quality in it that suggested tears and the specific relief of tears that had been held in too long. Harry closed his eyes. Tomorrow was the governor's meeting. Tomorrow was Lucius Malfoy in a room, and Harry would put the destroyed diary on the table in front of the full board of governors and he would tell them, precisely and completely, where he had found it and what it was and how it had come to be in Ginny Weasley's possession, and he would do it in a room that Malfoy couldn't control because it had too many witnesses, and he would do it with Hermione's documentation and his own testimony and the testimony of anyone who was willing to give it. But that was tomorrow. Tonight the castle was quiet and clean in a way it hadn't been since September 1st, a specific quality of quiet that wasn't the quiet of things being suppressed but the quiet of things being resolved, the way a room felt after a long difficult conversation that had ended honestly. He lay in the hospital wing and felt it around him like something breathing. Care landed on the foot of his bed without a sound. The small warm weight settled there and the gold light she threw was faint and steady and Harry didn't open his eyes but he felt the bird there, present, choosing to be. Good work, he said, to the bird, to the room, to whoever was listening. Care made a single soft sound. From Ron's bed, you're talking to the Phoenix again. Go to sleep, Ron. You do know she can't actually understand, a pause. A sound from Care that was brief and pointed. Never mind, Ron said. Good night. Harry smiled at the ceiling. The destroyed diary sat on the bedside table, finished and done and fully itself at last, just paper, just cloth, the soul gone out of it. 50 years since the chamber had last been opened. 50 years since a 16-year-old named Tom Riddle had built something dark and dangerous into the walls of a school that had given him the first home he'd ever known, and used it as a weapon, and sealed it away when he was done, and expected it to be there when he came back. He hadn't come back. Harry had. And the thing Tom Riddle had built to last was a ruined book on a bedside table and that was all it would ever be. Sleep came fast, and without dreams, and the castle held the night. Chapter 6. The reckoning Monday arrived with the particular clarity of mornings after storms, the kind where the air was washed and the light was sharp and everything had the quality of a world that had decided to be honest about itself. Harry was up before the castle fully woke. He showered in the headmaster's quarters and dressed in the same kind of clothes he always wore, jeans, a dark jumper, his school robes over the top, and he stood at the window with a mug of tea that a house elf had left on the desk without being asked and watched the grounds come into morning light. The lake was perfectly still. Frost on the near edge of it. The mountains above the tree-line had the first snow of the season on their peaks. He drank his tea and thought about what he was going to say. Not rehearsed. He'd never been good at rehearsed, his mouth did things his prepared text didn't plan for, and the result was always worse than if he'd just thought about the shape of what he meant and trusted himself to say it when the time came. So he thought about the shape. Lucius Malfoy, across a table. The Board of Governors, 12 of them, most of whom Harry couldn't name yet. The evidence Hermione had spent 4 days assembling with the single-minded thoroughness she brought to anything that mattered. And the destroyed diary. Which Harry picked up off the desk. Madame Pomfrey had released him and the others at 7, after feeding them breakfast in the hospital wing with the manner of someone who decided that if her patients were going to be reckless they were at least going to be well nourished, and put in the inside pocket of his robes. He felt it there. Light and finished and necessary. Hermione had the documentation ready at 8. She handed it to him in a folder of stiff parchment with the expression of someone turning in work they were certain of, which on Hermione meant she'd checked it 3 times more than certainty required. Provenance of the diary, she said, walking him through it with her finger on each section. Cross-referenced against Borgin and Burke's known catalogue, the diary is identifiable as an item in their 1955 inventory, sold to a buyer whose name they wouldn't give but whose description matched, Hermione. Yes. I've read it. It's good. It's more than good. He looked at her. How long did you sleep last night? A pause. Sufficiently. Hermione. 4 hours, she said. I'm fine. The documentation is complete. She closed the folder. I want to be in that meeting. I know. I'm serious, Harry. I've done the research, I know the case, and you're in the meeting, he said. She blinked. Oh. You, Ron, and Gemma. 3 people who know this school from the inside. The governors are going to hear from all of us. He tucked the folder under his arm. And I've sent word to Dumbledore. You told him to come? I told him he might want to be available. He can decide. He moved toward the door. Is Ginny, with Ron? She's fine. A pause. She's more than fine, actually. She's angry. Hermione said it with the particular approval she reserved for anger that was pointed in the right direction. Good, Harry said. She should be. He went downstairs to the Great Hall, because he wasn't going to the most important meeting of his tenure so far without breakfast, and because being seen eating calmly by 500 students on a Monday morning sent a specific message that no announcement could. The Board of Governors arrived at 10. Harry watched from the first-floor window as their carriages came up the road, not ministry carriages this time, private ones, the kind that communicated old money and institutional authority. 12 governors, plus Lucius Malfoy, who arrived in his own separate carriage, because apparently even within the board he preferred the statement of individual arrival. Malfoy stepped out with the composed ease of someone who had spent his life walking into rooms he intended to own, and he looked up at the castle with an expression that Harry, even from 50 feet above, could read clearly, the expression of a man who considered this building an asset that had behaved badly and required correction. Harry went down to meet them. He brought care. He hadn't planned this. The Phoenix had stepped from her alcove onto his shoulder as he left the office, and Harry had considered asking her to stay and then decided, no. If the castle had a Phoenix, the castle's representatives should know about it. Let Malfoy see the bird and understand what it meant. The governors were a mixture of old and middle-aged, 3 women and 9 men, and they came into the entrance hall with the collective bearing of people who expected deference and had been receiving it for decades. Several of them looked at Harry with the careful blankness of institutional faces, not dismissive, but reserved, waiting to form an opinion. Two of them looked at Care with genuine astonishment, which Harry filed. Malfoy looked at Care with recognition, and then immediately looked away from her, which told Harry more than astonishment would have. "Mr. Potter," said the board's chair, a heavy-set man with grey-streaked hair and a formal bearing that reminded Harry slightly of a magistrate. His name was Arcturus Blunt, according to Gemma's briefing notes. He'd been chair for 11 years. Centrist. Not a Malfoy ally but not a firm opponent either, the kind of institutional moderate who could be moved by evidence presented clearly. "Mr. Blunt," Harry said. "Thank you for coming. The meeting room is ready." He led them to the large conference room adjacent to the library, not the headmaster's office, which was too personal, and not the great hall, which was too public. The conference room had a long table that seated 14, windows overlooking the courtyard, and a particular quality of light at mid-morning that was clear without being harsh. Hermione, Ron, and Gemma were already seated on one side of the table when the governors filed in. Ron had his arms folded and his jaw set in a way that meant he was nervous but wasn't going to show it. Gemma was reading something, which was a performance, because Gemma had read everything necessary 3 times already. Hermione had her folder open and her quill out and was looking at the door with the steady readiness of someone who had been waiting to say things for 4 days. Malfoy sat directly across from Harry. He arranged himself with the unhurried precision of a man performing confidence rather than feeling it, and his face when he looked at Harry across the table was smooth and pleasant and entirely controlled. Harry thought about Ginny on the floor of the chamber. He thought about Draco in the office on Thursday, unable to finish a sentence. He put the destroyed diary on the table between them. Malfoy looked at it. His face did almost nothing. The control was extraordinary. Years of training in rooms where showing your reaction was the same as showing your cards. But almost nothing was not nothing, and Harry watched the fractional tightening around the eyes, the half-second where the smooth pleasantness had to be actively reconstructed rather than merely maintained. "Perhaps," Blunt said, looking at the diary with the measured curiosity of a man who understood that an object placed on a table at the start of a meeting was placed there deliberately, "we should begin." "Yes," Harry said. "Let's." He laid it out plainly. He didn't use Hermione's documentation first, he let her hold that back, because the documentation was the verification and what came first should be the story, told by the person who'd lived it. He talked for 11 minutes. He described finding Ginny in the corridor. He described the diary and what it was. He described Dobby's warning in July and what it implied about where the diary had come from. He described the Chamber of Secrets, what it contained, what it had been doing to students in the building. He put the destroyed Fong on the table next to the diary. He described what he had done with it and why. He spoke without notes, without drama, at a conversational pace that made the silence of the room progressively heavier as the weight of what he was describing accumulated. When he finished, Hermione slid the documentation folder down the table to Blunt. "Cross-referenced against public records," she said, "including Borgin and Burke's known inventory, the Ministry's Dark Object Registry, and 3 independent magical theory sources that confirm the construction method of the artifact." Blunt opened the folder. The room was very quiet. The governors read. Malfoy looked at the table with the expression of a man who had prepared for a different version of this meeting. "This is very serious," said one of the governors, a woman near the end of the table, sharp-eyed, whose name Harry had been told was Cornelia Shafik. She was looking at Malfoy. "Lucius. You've heard this. What do you have to say?" Malfoy looked up with the composed ease that was either genuine or an act so practiced it had become indistinguishable from genuine. "What I have to say is that these are extraordinary allegations made by a 12-year-old with no adult verification, against a man who has served this board faithfully for, I have verification," said a voice from the doorway. Albus Dumbledore walked in. He was wearing traveling robes, slightly dusty from the road, and he carried himself with the specific quality of a man who had been expelled from his own school and was re-entering it for the first time, which was, no fanfare, no drama, just the patient gravity of someone who had been thinking carefully about something for 9 days and had arrived at conclusions. He looked at Harry first. Not asking permission, checking in. An acknowledgement. Harry nodded. Dumbledore sat in the empty chair at the end of the table. He folded his hands. He looked at Malfoy with eyes that had been watching people for the better part of a century. I have suspected, he said, for some years that Lucius Malfoy came into possession of Tom Riddle's diary during the raid on your home, Lucius, in 1986. I was never able to prove it. He paused. Harry has now destroyed the artifact and severed the connection between the object and its creator's soul fragment. What remains as evidence is the physical diary, the method of its destruction, and the chain of possession that can be traced from Borgin and Burkes to the Malfoy family to a first-year Gryffindor student who was given a second-hand Transfiguration textbook. A short, comprehensive silence. The textbook, Ron said from his side of the table, and everyone looked at him. He met the room without flinching. Ginny got second-hand books this year because we couldn't afford new ones. In Diagon Alley, in the bookshop, there was a confrontation. Our family and the Malfoys. He looked at Malfoy. Ginny's books were in her cauldron. And then they were in her cauldron with the diary in them, and we didn't notice. The room absorbed this. You put it in her cauldron, Blunt said to Malfoy. Not a question. Malfoy said nothing. Lucius, said Cornelia Shafik, and her voice had the specific quality of institutional patience reaching its limit, I have known you for 23 years, and I have looked the other way at a great many things during and after the war because I believed you had genuinely changed. I need you to tell me right now whether you put a soul fragment of Voldemort's in a child's schoolbooks. The name landed in the room. Several governors flinched. Malfoy did not flinch, because Malfoy had been in the room with the original for long enough that the name had lost whatever power it held over ordinarily frightened people. What he did was look at Harry. Not with contempt. Not with the managed pleasantness of the meeting's opening. With something that had no label, the look of a man performing a very fast and private calculation in a room full of people who couldn't see the numbers. I believed, he said, carefully, that the artifact's properties were largely theoretical. That it would serve as a disruption to the school's functioning, nothing more. I did not anticipate the consequences for the girl. You gave a piece of Voldemort to a first year, Harry said. The language was plain and direct and it hit the room the way plain direct language hit rooms that were accustomed to euphemism. Several governors shifted. Malfoy looked at Harry with something that was, for the first time, stripped of performance. Yes, he said. The word fell into absolute silence. What followed was not dramatic. Institutional reckonings rarely were, in Harry's limited but growing experience, they were administrative, procedural, the mechanism of consequence turning slowly but turning. Blunt called for a 15-minute recess. The governors spoke in two clusters at the far end of the room. Malfoy sat alone at his end of the table. Harry went to the window and looked at the courtyard. Hermione came and stood beside him without speaking, which was the correct thing to do. Ron went and got water from the sideboard and brought 3 glasses and handed them out without ceremony. Gemma Farley said, quietly, from behind them, he didn't have to say yes. No, Harry agreed. He could have denied it forever. The evidence is strong but not conclusive, Dumbledore's suspicion, a diary with no usable provenance chain, a second-hand memory of a confrontation in a bookshop. She paused. He chose to confirm it. Harry had been thinking about this. He thought about Draco, Thursday, the office, the expression on his face when he looked at the cloth-wrapped diary. He thought about Lucius Malfoy's letter, its careful language, items of school property, the fact that he'd sent for it rather than come himself. He didn't know what it would do, Harry said. Or he told himself he didn't. And then a child nearly died, and it turns out that somewhere under all of it, that's a line. He watched a group of second-years crossing the courtyard below, scarves pulled tight against the October cold. He confirmed it because he needed to. Because carrying it forward would have required something else that he doesn't have left. Gemma was quiet for a moment. You're very generous to someone who put a dark artifact in a child's schoolbooks. I'm not being generous, Harry said. I'm being accurate. It doesn't change what he did. The recess ended. Blunt called the room back. He spoke for 4 minutes in the measured cadences of institutional conclusion, and what it amounted to was, Lucius Malfoy was suspended from the Board of Governors pending a full ministry investigation. The investigation would be referred to the Magical Law Enforcement Office rather than Fudge's direct office, because 2 of the governors were personally acquainted with the head of magical law enforcement and trusted him in a way they apparently did not entirely trust the minister. And the board's business regarding the headmaster appointment would proceed to vote as scheduled. The vote was 12-1 in favor of recognizing Harry's appointment. The one was the governor who'd already decided before the meeting started, and who wasn't Malfoy. Blunt looked at Harry across the table with the direct assessment of someone revising a prior judgment. Mr. Potter, he said. The board recognizes Hogwarts' right to make its appointments. We'll require quarterly reports on school performance, to be submitted to this body. Of course, Harry said. And I'd suggest, Blunt said, with a dry precision that Harry thought was the closest he came to humor, that you consider a more sustainable staffing arrangement before the end of term. I'm working on it, Harry said. Malfoy left before the governor's carriages. He walked out of the conference room and through the entrance hall with the same composed bearing he'd arrived with, because people like Lucius Malfoy did not let institutional catastrophe alter their posture, and Harry watched him go without following. But at the front door, Malfoy stopped. He turned and looked at Harry, who was standing in the entrance hall. Not across the room, from the doorway, at a distance, with the cold October air coming through the open door behind him. My son, he said. Harry waited. Draco. Malfoy's voice was exactly controlled. He'll face consequences for what I've done. At home, in the community. A pause. Not here, I assume. Not here, Harry said. What Draco knew or didn't know is his business unless it becomes mine. It hasn't. Malfoy looked at him for another moment, and in that moment there was something that was not gratitude, not close to gratitude. Lucius Malfoy had not arrived at the geography of gratitude in this conversation, but something that was the recognition of a debt recorded. He turned and walked out. The door closed behind him. Care made a soft sound from Harry's shoulder. Yeah, Harry said. I know. Draco was waiting in the corridor outside the conference room. He'd been there for some of it. The stone corridor amplified voices when the acoustic angle was right, and the conference room door was thick but not impenetrable. Harry didn't know exactly how much he'd heard, but he'd heard enough. His face when Harry came out had the quality of something that had been held under pressure for a long time and had just been released, which didn't look like relief, it looked like pain, which was where relief started when you've been carrying something that hurt. He admitted it, Draco said. Yes. Draco was looking at the middle distance. I didn't know what the diary was, he said. Not exactly. I knew my father had given her something. I knew it wasn't. He stopped. I didn't ask enough questions. No, Harry said. Draco's jaw worked. Are you going to tell me I should have come to you sooner? Would you have listened? A pause. No. Then there's no point saying it, Harry said. You did what you did. You're here now. He looked at Draco, at the controlled face and the careful bearing and the specific exhaustion of someone who'd been performing a version of himself that no longer fit. For what it's worth, what you chose on Thursday mattered. It didn't fix anything. But it mattered. Draco looked at him. The control shifted, briefly, and underneath it was a 17-year-old, which he wasn't yet. Harry reminded himself, Draco was 12, they were all 12 in a situation that had been treating them as substantially older, and for a second that was what Harry saw, a 12-year-old who'd been given a set of values that had just come apart in a board meeting. What do I do now? Draco asked. It was a real question. Not rhetorical, not a challenge. The genuine question of someone whose map had stopped working. Figure out what you actually think, Harry said. Not what you've been told to think. What you, specifically, Draco Malfoy, think about things when nobody's watching. Draco stared at him. That's your advice, he said. It's the only advice that'll work, Harry said, and walked past him down the corridor. He heard, behind him, Draco exhale, a long, slightly ragged breath, the sound of someone putting something down. He didn't look back. The afternoon ran like the afternoons of the previous week had run, classes, conversations, the ordinary machinery of a school in motion, but with a quality underneath it that was different from any previous day. A lightness. The specific relief of a building that has had something removed from it that had been sitting in its walls for 50 years. Harry taught his afternoon defense class and it was the best one yet. He'd stopped planning them after the first day and had started simply responding to what the students brought, which meant the class was different every time. Today it turned out to be an extended discussion of magical theory as it applied to protective magic, started by a fourth-year Ravenclaw who asked a genuinely complex question about the mechanics of the Patronus that Harry answered in real time by thinking through it out loud, and then 2 seventh-years joined the thinking, and the class became a collaborative working through of something that none of them fully understood yet but all of them were genuinely trying to. Afterward, walking back to the office, Harry passed the second-floor corridor. The writing was gone from the wall. He'd known it would be, he'd checked this morning, but seeing the clean stone where the Parseltongue letters had been had a quality he wanted to acknowledge by stopping and looking at it for a moment. Clean. Plain. Just wall. He put his hand on it briefly, the way you put your hand on something you were glad was over. The stone was warm. Ginny found him at 6, while he was eating dinner in the great hall in a seat that had gradually become his usual seat, not the center of the high table, which still felt performative, but a seat at its end, close enough to the Gryffindor table to hear the conversations at it, far enough to see the whole room. She sat down next to him, which was unusual enough. Students sat with their houses, generally, that a few people noticed. I'm angry, she said, without preamble. You should be, Harry said. At my parents, a bit, she said. For the second-hand books. For putting us in the position where someone could, she stopped. That's not fair. It's not their fault. It's not, Harry agreed. And being angry anyway isn't unfair. It's just honest. She was quiet for a moment, picking at her food. I wrote in that diary for weeks, she said. I told him things I've never told anyone. Things about this year, about being a first year and being the only girl in a family of brothers and she stopped again. He used all of it. He made me feel seen and then he used it. Harry looked at her. That's what that kind of manipulation does. It looks for the real things. The things you actually need. And it offers them as bait. He paused. That's not a reflection on you. It's a reflection on how well it was designed. It was designed by a 16-year-old. Voldemort was brilliant, Harry said. At 16, at 50, at whatever age he is now. He's brilliant and he's cruel and the combination is specifically effective against people who just want someone to listen. He held her gaze. That's not a weakness you have. That's a need that every human being has, and he exploited it. The anger should go at him. Not at yourself. Ginny looked at him for a long moment with the clear direct Weasley stare that all of them had in common, the one that saw through performances and pleasantries. You're not bad at this, she said. For 12. For 12, he agreed. She almost smiled. Then she did smile, small and real, and went back to her food, and Harry went back to his, and they ate in companionable silence while the great hall moved and talked around them. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy ate alone in a way that was slightly different from his usual alone by choice. 2 of his regular group had moved seats, not dramatically, not confrontationally, just quietly repositioned, the way social allegiances shifted when the gravity of a situation changed. He was eating steadily and looking at his plate, and Harry watched him for a moment and then looked away. Some things had to sort themselves out. That evening, after the hall had cleared and the portraits in the office had settled into their evening conversations and Ron had fallen asleep on the sofa with a Quidditch magazine on his face, Harry wrote 3 letters. The first was to Madame Pomfrey, requesting a formal assessment of what additional medical provisions the hospital wing needed that it hadn't had under the previous administration. She'd mentioned twice in passing that the supply of certain potions' ingredients had been inconsistent. Harry wrote the letter and signed it and marked it urgent and put it in the immediate pile. The second letter was to Professor Sprout. He wrote it carefully, because it mattered. He described what the greenhouses had been in the 9 days since term started, Hannah's work, the students who'd been coming in voluntarily, the strange quality of care that had developed around a space that was usually just a curriculum requirement. He said that the greenhouses needed its professor back. He said that he hoped she'd consider returning, on whatever terms she felt were right, and that he would welcome a conversation about what that looked like. He signed it, H. J. Potter, Headmaster. And then, below that, smaller, Harry. The third letter was the hardest. He sat with it for 20 minutes before he started writing, looking at the fire, at the empty perch, at Kara in her alcove watching him with her old bright eyes. Then he wrote, Professor McGonagall, you love this school. I know this because everything I've found in it that works, every system that functions, every student who was looked after when they needed looking after, almost all of it traces back to you. The house point system, the way the prefects actually know their responsibilities, the pastoral care structure for first years, the study schedule coordination. You built all of that. It works. This school runs, in very large part, because of the invisible infrastructure you put in place over 30 years. I don't know why the castle expelled you with everyone else. I don't know if I understand what it was deciding. But I know that whatever it was deciding about, it wasn't that your contributions were worthless. I think it was deciding about something else entirely. I'd like you to come back. Not as my deputy, I'm not going to insult you by making that offer, but as yourself, as Professor McGonagall, as the best transfiguration teacher in Britain, as the person who has done more actual work in this building than anyone alive. On your terms. Your classroom, your schedule, your standards. I'll stay out of your way except when I shouldn't. There are students here who need you. I think you probably know that already. Yours, Harry. He sealed it and set it aside, and sat back, and felt the weight of it, the right weight, the kind that came from saying something true rather than something polished. Dilly said, from her portrait, she'll come back. I know, Harry said. She's been walking the grounds every morning since the first, Dilly said. The castle lets her in. She doesn't go inside, but she comes to the edge of the grounds and walks the perimeter. Harry looked at her. Did the castle let her in from the beginning? From the 3rd day, Dilly's confirmed. Harry thought about that. The castle, letting McGonagall walk the perimeter. Not inside, but near. The way you kept someone close without inviting them to stay. It was waiting, he said. For me to write the letter. Perhaps, Dilly said. Or perhaps it was waiting for you to be ready to mean it. She settled back in her painted chair. There's a difference. Harry nodded slowly. Yes, he said. There is. The response came the next morning before breakfast. Not by Owl, by the office door opening and Professor McGonagall walking through it, which was a thing that required either a key or the castle's cooperation, and she had neither, which meant the castle had simply let her in, the way it had been letting her walk the perimeter, on its own judgment. She was in her traveling robes, tartan-edged, her hair in its customary severity, and she stood in the doorway of the headmaster's office and looked at Harry behind the headmaster's desk with an expression that he was not going to describe to anyone because it was private, the kind of expression that belonged to a person and not to a characterization. He stood up. He didn't know exactly why he did, but it felt right. Professor McGonagall, he said. Harry, she said. A pause that held several things simultaneously. The Transfiguration curriculum, she said, is in severe need of reconstruction from the third year upward. I've been able to see from the grounds that classes are running, but I have concerns about theoretical coverage. Yes, Harry said. I'll also want to know about this prefect council structure. It has potential, but I saw Wormtail, I saw a Gryffindor 7th year running a joint house meeting last Thursday from this window, and the methodology was unsound. Fair criticism, Harry said. And the hospital wing, she stopped. Looked at the room. At the books, the rearranged furniture, the documentation system Hermione had put on the desk. The portraits awake at 9 in the morning, which they'd started doing consistently after the first day. Kare in her alcove, watching McGonagall with bright interested eyes. That's a phoenix, McGonagall said. Yes. Hogwarts doesn't have a, she stopped again. Where did it, the castle, Harry said. It's been here the whole time. Nobody asked. McGonagall looked at Kare. Kare looked at McGonagall with the unperturbed dignity of a bird that had been here considerably longer than either of them. Something passed across McGonagall's face that was complicated and completed in a second. Right, she said. Right. She straightened her robes. I'll be in the Transfiguration classroom from 8 onward. I'd like the new curriculum notes from whoever's been running the subject so I can assess continuity. I'll send them up, Harry said. She turned to go. At the door she stopped, and didn't turn around, and said, You've done well, Harry. I don't say that often, and I don't say it lightly. Then she was gone, her footsteps brisk and precise on the stone corridor, and Harry stood in the office and looked at the door and felt Kare's warm weight on his shoulder, and the portraits were watching him with the expressions of people who had been watching Hogwarts for a very long time and were watching something they hadn't seen before. Ron, from the sofa, was that, yes. Did she just, yes. Brilliant, Ron said, and turned over and went back to sleep. Sprout's response to Harry's letter arrived 2 days later, yes, with the provision that she could work with Hannah on joint curriculum development. Harry wrote back immediately, yes, and thank you, and I've put you both in the same greenhouse for Tuesday mornings. Flitwick sent a note, not a formal letter. Would tomorrow be convenient? I've been practicing some new approaches to the intermediate charms curriculum and I'd welcome a conversation. From Hagrid, who lived on the grounds and had technically never been expelled since he didn't live in the castle, a basket of rock cakes on the headmaster's desk one morning, and a note in his enormous handwriting, Glad you're back where you're supposed to be, Harry. Glad the school's got someone who knows what it's fair. Snape didn't write. Harry didn't expect him to. But 3 weeks into October, the potions classroom was unlocked and occupied when Harry walked past it, not by Marcus Webb, who had classes of his own on Tuesday afternoons, by Snape, who was standing at the board writing a set of 7th-year NEWT preparation notes in his particular precise hand. The door was open. Students were seated. The room smelled of the correct things. Harry stopped in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds. Snape turned and looked at him. Harry nodded. Snape turned back to the board. That was that. The formal speech, the one the Board of Governors had requested as a term-end statement of intent, the one that Hermione had been drafting for 2 weeks with increasing ambition and complexity, happened on the last Friday of October, in the Great Hall. Harry had read Hermione's draft. It was excellent. It was 12 paragraphs of precisely argued educational philosophy that synthesized everything they'd done in October and positioned it within a broader framework of institutional reform. He thanked her genuinely, and profusely, and completely, and then he set it aside. He stood in front of the school, all of them, every year, every house, the returning professors seated to the side, the Board of Governors represented by Blunt and Shafiq in the back row, and the specific weight of 500 people waiting to hear what he had to say about everything that had happened. He thought about his first night in this hall. The speech he'd given off the top of his head while still working out what he meant. The part that had mattered, I notice things. I'm not good at ignoring them once I've noticed. He looked out at all of them for a moment. I'm not a natural at speeches, he said. So I'll keep this short. This term, we found out what this school was actually for. Not just what it was supposed to be, what it actually does, when it's working, which is, it keeps you safe and it teaches you things that matter and it treats you like you're worth the effort. He paused. None of that is complicated. None of it required inventing anything new. It just required someone to pay attention to what was already here and take it seriously. He looked around the room. You did that. All of you. You showed up and you did the work and you made this place what it should be. Another pause. I'm proud of you. All of you. Even the ones who tried to stage a coup in a fourth-floor classroom on day 3. From the Slytherin table, a sound that was almost a laugh, then actually a laugh. From across the table, Draco Malfoy looked at Harry with an expression that had, over a month, traveled a long way from where it had started. Not warm, not friendly, but honest. The specific honesty of someone who'd revised something fundamental and hadn't finished working out what to do with the revision. That's it, Harry said. Thank you. He sat down. Blunt, in the back row, was making a note on his parchment. Shafiq was looking at the room with the expression of someone watching something they'd been skeptical about and were adjusting their skepticism accordingly. McGonagall, at the end of the professor's row, was looking at Harry with the expression she'd had in the office doorway, the private one, except now it was less private because she'd stopped trying to keep it off her face. Ron kicked him under the table. 4 sentences, he said. Hermione wrote 12 paragraphs. Yours was better, Ron said. Hermione, on Harry's other side, made a sound. It was good, she said, which from Hermione was the same as what Ron said. Harry looked out at the hall. At the ceiling, which was doing something particular with the late October light, gold and amber, the enchanted sky showing the last of the sunset through the clouds. At the 4 long tables, the students eating and talking, some across house lines, some not, the ordinary beautiful mess of it. At the castle around them. Warm in the walls. Present. He thought about September 1st. About the plaque on the door and his name in brass. About the way he'd stood in the doorway of the headmaster's office and felt the rightness of it and not known yet what the rightness was for. He knew now. Not power. Not authority. Not the title or the desk or the portraits. This. The school working. The students safe. The thing in the walls gone and the light clean and the hall full of people who had done something genuinely hard and done it together, and who would carry it forward from here. The castle was warm around him. It had been warm since the beginning, since the gates, since the plaque, since that first night when he'd sat on the hearthrug and asked for help and something very old had listened. He looked at the ceiling one more time, at the shifting amber light, and thought, thank you. The torches brightened. Just slightly. The warmth in the walls increased by a degree. The castle said nothing. It never did. But it had said it first, in September, in the only language it had, which was warmth and light and a name on a door, and Harry had heard it then and he heard it now, and he thought that was probably how the best conversations worked, the important thing said once, clearly, and then carried forward in everything that came after. He ate his dinner. Outside, the first snow of October began to fall on the grounds of Hogwarts, soft and clean on the lake and the lawns and the greenhouse roofs, and the castle held them all against the dark, as it had always done, as it would always do, and for the first time in a very long time, perhaps since the founders had laid the first stones and dreamed of something worth building, it held them right.